I saw you working with, I think it's a running back for the Detroit Lions. The exact kind of move that you're talking with him about in the gym, he ends up performing it right on the field.
What we're working on is just the ability to generate force and project your center of mass when you're stopping and you're breaking a cut. I absolutely detest ladder drills. I think they're 100% waste of time.
How do you train speed?
You have to start producing force before you get on the ground. I think in terms of tissue quality, in terms of being able to be strong at end ranges to protect yourself, that stuff is crucial. I have seen poor ankle mobility mess up more people's backs than a lack of bracing. You got to be careful as a coach. If you want to learn and grow, questions are more important than answers.
How do they know when they're maybe going too far when it comes to the strength?
I'm at super training, so this is going to sound like sacrilege. Any strength you take to an extreme will become a weakness.
I think it'd be interesting to get your perspective on this. There's some players get someone like a Barry Sanders who barely missed any games. And then you got guys like Tom Brady. I know Tom Brady was out for a bit. I think he might have missed a season or half season at one point. There's some players that missed some games here and there, but the great ones seem to be pretty resilient. And maybe it's just the fact that some of the guys that get hurt, they don't get an opportunity to show their greatness. But all the years of working with all these athletes, what is something that is there a way to prevent injury? In some of these sports, especially professional football, there's a lot of shit going on. Mm-hmm. And you're not just dealing with ground forces and so on. You're dealing with somebody else running you down, tackling you, and so on. What is your thoughts on that? You think it's resilience, luck, giant combination of 8 million things, or what do you think?
It's a combination of a lot of things. My answer might surprise you, but the concept of preventing injury is actually pretty difficult to do in that type of a sport. Some of it just comes down to bad luck. Some of it comes down to all types of things. But you can do a lot of things to become more resilient. And most importantly, you can do a lot of things to help you bounce back from the injuries quicker, which is probably, to me, a better focus than trying to prevent the injury to begin with, because that's a lot trickier thing to do. I think, generally speaking, there's two different types of guys that get injured. You get the guys who get injured on contact and the guys who get injured getting to contact. So that's running to get there, pulling hamstrings, tweaking stuff. Then there's on contact, getting knocked out, separating shoulders, all those types of things. And generally, the guys who get injured getting to contact have issues with elasticity and tissue elasticity and springiness and those types of things and quality of soft tissue. And the guys who get injured on contact generally have problems with what we call compliance, or being able to create good system stiffness and have certain strength and stuff like that. So if guys have one of those two problems to begin with, it can address how you might approach their training to solve those things. So that's a big starting point. Mm-hmm. And then just having good overall broad systems approach to getting the athlete ready. Sometimes we get too focused on just what does the athlete need for this sport? What are the demands for the sport, and how can we train those demands? But we also have to look at what is the athlete's level of competency to be able to train for the demands of the sport. Mm. And if you don't address their level of competency and change it, then you're asking for potential injury problems. So that's the first thing. You have to make that a delineation. Are we training to this athlete's level of competency with no regard for what his demand for the sport is, or are we just going to train, these are the demands for the sport, that's what we have to do. And that's a middle ground. That's kind of a little tension you have to manage all the time. But that does contribute to injury prevention for sure.
Mm. When it comes to just strength training in general, I saw you working with, I think it's a running back for the Detroit Lions, and you were working on some movements with him. And what were you kind of working on exactly with him? And if you can try to find the clip on Ian's Instagram, it might be cool to try to bring that up, because I thought it was amazing that the exact kind of move that you're talking with him about in the gym is that he ends up performing it right on the field.
Yeah, so what we're working on is just the ability to generate force and project your center of mass when you're stopping and you're breaking a cut. So a lot of guys can stop their feet quickly or start their feet quickly, but if you're not actually moving, gaining direction in where you want to go, it doesn't necessarily make you a harder target, because you're not creating distance between you and your opponent. And so that is a thing that it's intent. You have to set up to know that's what you're trying to do. And it's a mindset thing. It's getting out of that whole, fast feet or slow feet don't need. Come on, just move your feet quickly. And learning to you have to apply force quickly and project your body. And that was just one of the things that we're working on with him, because he had a tendency to move his feet really quickly but not get his body going. And that a lot of that is understanding it, intent, strength relative to your body weight is a huge factor. Orientation of your force, so you get it going in the right place, it's another factor. So just working on all those things. And so for him, it's paying off. He's doing well, and he's more conscious of that.
So for these guys that are doing ladder drills, but their feet are super quick, even though they're staying in place, generally, if they do have fast feet, do you think it wouldn't be too difficult for them to now learn how to transfer that force in one direction or the other? Because there's some athletes that are doing ladder drills where they're just their feet are slow as fuck. But there's some that it looks really impressive, although, like you said, it's still very static.
Yeah, so I absolutely detest ladder drills. I think they're 100% waste of time.
Okay.
And they do multiple bad things. They encourage fast feet movement over force production. Okay.
Yeah.
Force production in a short period of time is what has to happen. Okay. So fast feet eliminates all the force production, and it just considers time. Okay.
Yes.
The other thing it does is it makes people change how they see things. So if you watch someone doing ladders, they're focused on what their feet are doing and where they're going. They're not looking at that's happening. Okay. In real sport, great performers are differentiated by how long they can keep their eye focused on a certain thing and move and read and use their eyes to make their feet go where they want to go. Doing a speed ladder completely detrains that aspect. It takes that away from you.
Looking down at your feet.
And not moving, reacting to something that's happening. Okay. That's a commonality in all sports where you have to be able to do that. Okay. So really good eye discipline, let's call it, dictates a lot of what you do with your feet. And then even if I move my feet well, okay, and let's just say I move my feet well and I produce the requisite amount of force, if I don't go in the direction I need to go because my eyes aren't taking me where I want to go, it's not helping me that much anyway. So I believe that when you're using a speed ladder and you're taking away that concept of using your eyes, it ruins a lot of things. So when you think about it, you have two major inputs into your body: your feet and your eyes. Okay, you're in terms of interpreting what's happening on the force on the ground and how you should move. It's like your body is this computer, your feet are the keyboard, your brain is the CPU. You want to get as clean an input as you can from your feet going in. So that's not just a technical thing. That's like a structure, strong feet, stiff ankles, all those types of things. But you're putting all the input in, and your eyes are the other input. So to me, the speed ladder is detraining your eyes, and it's detraining your feet because it's not focused on producing force in a short period of time. It's just chop, 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 move as quick as you can. The other thing is, almost everybody can move their feet quick. They're not, the differentiation between how fast you move is linked to how much force you can produce in a short period of time, not just how fast you can move your feet. And if you look at something that's, if we break it down to even simpler, just straight linear sprinting, the thing that differentiates the elite guys from the developing counterparts is literally the amount of force that they produce and the time they spend on the ground. So even if you took out a guy who's pretty fast, like a really good high school sprinter that runs 10.8 for 100 meters, which that's a for your average person, that's very, very fast running. Okay. The difference between that guy and the guy that runs 9.8 or breaks a world record, the difference shows up not in frequency. It shows up in the time that they spend on the ground. So the average guy spends more time on the ground, where the elite guy is running over the ground. Short ground contact time, covering big distance.
The elite guy is able to generate more, power or force into the ground and react to it differently, react to it quicker, get his foot off the ground, whereas the other guy, is generating a lot of force. He is running a 10.8, which is flying, but because of that force that he generates downward, his foot stays on the ground a little longer.
Because he can't do it in a short enough period of time, produce a big force in a short enough period of time. Sometimes you can't produce enough force, or sometimes you can't do it in a short enough period of time. But the key is still, you have to produce a certain amount of force quickly to do it. And when you take away the force component of it, you're not really training anymore.
So quick application question for any coaches that are like working with high school footballers or soccer players, because I remember when I played soccer in high school and college, they still have us usually on ladders sometimes, right? What should they do instead? Cones? Or is there like, I know it depends on what they're trying to build. And usually when people are using ladders, they're trying to improve the athlete's ability to have good footwork, right? What should they do instead?
Practice the skill of their sport.
Okay.
So you should use things like plyometrics, sprinting, lifting, all those things to develop those biomotor abilities, and then go practice your sport. Okay. Do the right drills. Do them with real reaction to other stimuli and other things where you're going through that, and let that take care of the stuff instead of trying to make these little drills to mimic it that are not going to get close enough anyway, but are going to create some type of change that takes you farther away from what you really want to do in the sport.
How do you train? How do you train that? How do you train speed? How do you train somebody to have their foot on the ground less?
Yeah, that's a whole podcast in and of itself.
I mean, I think if you think about we could like squat and get stronger that way, but it's like, it sounds like it's multifactorial. We got to get probably stronger and better in multiple disciplines.
For sure. So strength relative to your body weight is a big factor. Okay. But also the rate of force production is a huge factor. Like how fast can you produce that force? Okay.
What's an example of that? Would like something like a rack deadlift or something be like an example of somebody being able to produce a lot of force or power in a short period of time? Or is Olympic lifting like that? Or
Olympic lifting is a little bit more like that. Throwing an object, jumping, jump squats, things like that would do a much better job of doing that.
Jump squats?
Yep, jump squats will do that. Yep.
Okay. Like what kind of jump squats? Just
well, we'll come back to that for a second.
Gotcha.
On this.
Okay.
But so the idea of being able to produce the short force in a period of time, first you got to be able to produce the force. Then you have to have, you want all the things to be reactive and reflexive to be able to do this fast. So in other words, you have to start producing force before you get on the ground. So all like in running, we call it front side mechanics, all the stuff you need to do to drive down to the ground, that's where you got to produce a big amount of force. Then once you contact the ground, you have to have extreme stiffness, particularly at the ankle joint, so that you don't have these energy leaks and everything bleed. And then from there, now you're just getting off the ground type of thing. And so you got to be able to generate big force. You got to be doing it in a short period of time. Then you have to orient those forces where they need to go. Because if you're not directing them where they need to go, you're only going to get some vector component of that force taking you where you want to go, which is going to be less. And so how that force is applied, just for example, is the force does it have to have a more vertical component or horizontal component? And that depends on what you're trying to do, where you are, all these different types of things. But you have to learn those things, understand them, and train specifically for them. But I like to tell people, look, at the very basic level, it's not too complicated. It's try to lift big weights fast, okay? Sprint, jump, and throw heavy shit. Okay. And then, again, how you do that, like what percentage of what you do, the sequencing of it, the volume of it, that is much more complicated. But those are really the basics of how you develop that type of stuff, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you were mentioning the jump squats. Like what kind of jump squats are we talking?
Well, again, a jump squat, like people will look at a jump squat and call it like a plyometric activity, but I don't really see it that way. I see it more in the same way as a throwing is. It's almost like a ballistic activity because it doesn't have that same quick reaction, short turnaround ground contact time like regular jumping does. But it's really good for working explosion right through the whole and rate of force production right through the end of stuff. Now, when we do things like, say, a squat, a certain percentage of what you're doing is decelerating the weight because you're not jumping right through the end. So the end period, you're slowing it down, okay? And so the lighter the load, obviously the bigger percentage of the period where you have to decelerate that stuff. Mm-hmm. But as we try to go through that, what we're doing is we're we're doing something that doesn't really happen in sport, whereas at the end range of motion, we're slowing down, where we're normally going as fast as we can through that end range of motion in real life. So by doing something like a jump squat, you're more closely mimicking what happens, which is full force, high speed, right through the end of the range of motion.
Someone taking someone down or someone tackling somebody or whatever.
For sure, or jumping or throwing or whatever the case may be. It's not, you're not slowing down at the end range. You're going as fast as you possibly can through the end range of motion. And so doing something like a jump squat will mimic that. And so that helps translate in many ways. And it also helps with the brain and firing frequency and coordination of firing and all those types of things. And so for that purpose, they can work well. It's not necessarily the be-all and end-all. It's not as good as straight jumping and reactive plyometric activity for things like developing elastic potential energy, like how the muscle can just store energy and spring it off. And a lot of that just has to do with having stiff tendons, letting tendons do a lot of work. There's so many different components to what's happening here. And so that's why you want to have different modalities to train all these things, because one thing won't train. And what happens with a lot of people is they get stuck in the one thing. And it could be the strength thing, because that's a rabbit hole that I've gone down, and a lot of people have gone down and made the mistake of overemphasizing how much the strength is. And I mean, like I'm at super training, so this is going to sound like sacrilege, because the adage here is strength is never weakness, weakness is never a strength, right? But any strength you take to an extreme will become a weakness. I mean, that's just life. You know what I mean? Like,
say that again for us. That's great.
Yeah. Any strength taken to an extreme will become a weakness. And I think that's not just training, that's life. You know, like as an example, you want to be ambitious, right? You want to go after stuff, big goals, change things, be super. But when you take ambition to an extreme, you'll never be content. If you're never content, you're never going to be happy. You know what I mean? It's just life. Anything that you see as a strength that you take to an extreme will become a weakness. And in training, sometimes that happens with strength training because it feels so good and it's easy to get addicted to it, and you can see the gains and feel it and measure it and do all types of things. But you can find yourself spending way too much time on stuff that is not going to take you where you want to go in your sport, because you already have a sufficient level of it. And getting better at that it's not going to help you anymore, and you're wasting training energy. You're adapting your muscles in a way that's more compliant and less elastic. There's a lot of things that go into it. And so you can do that. You know, for a lot of people, that's not the case. They're just weak. But I mean, that happens, you know, and it can go the other way.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Because this is great. You know, when we mentioned you on the podcast before, and when going through a lot of your stuff, it's you use a lot of different modalities, but you don't overemphasize strength, as you just explained in a great way. Like, yeah, too strong, you're not going to be able to move as well. This is where people talk about they're getting stiff and unathletic. Like, but a certain level of strength is necessary. You have your athletes do so many things. When it comes to strength specifically, how would an athlete know? An athlete specifically, not like a power lifter or Olympic lifter or a bodybuilder, but an athlete, a sport athlete, how do they know when they're maybe going too far when it comes to the strength? Because, yeah, like you mentioned, you can see the gains, but there's going to come a certain point where you're getting diminishing returns, and then at some point, negative returns for how much strength you're building.
That's a great question. I mean, it's hard to know that other than experimenting through training and seeing what certain values are doing for you. And you have to have specific KPIs, key performance indicators. And if you don't see those changing as the strength goes up, then you have to ask yourself the question, is this working, and is there a requisite amount of strength? And then there's also the whole idea of what is the amount of strength that's needed for that sport. So if my sport is required me to run or jump, it requires a lot of strength. It's not going to require the same amount of strength as if I got to throw a shot put. So right away, I already know that I'm in a little different category that I'm dealing with there, right? Even if we look at something that you'd say Olympic lifting is a great example, because when they're lifting, they're actually practicing their sport, which is another differentiation that we can come back to. But even in that case, you can look at that and say, okay, I need to clean and jerk 200 kilos, okay? Obviously, I got to front squat 200 kilos or I can't get that up. So I want to have some reserve. I want to front squat 240, maybe 250 kilos, we'll say. But Once I can do that, there is no point in me trying to front squat 300 kilos when my pull is not as strong or I'm not doing other things as well. I want to be able to like put my training energy into other things that are going to help me, right? Yeah. And so in that particular case, because it's so quantifiable and you're doing the actual sport lifting, it's easy to measure. But in other things, it's not as easy to measure. But the idea of knowing what that limit is and looking at KPIs to figure that out is crucial. You got to know that.
How do you examine that? Like when you're working with an athlete directly?
Mm-hmm. So we'll look at different things. Like I like to see, okay, first of all, what is your basic strength to body weight ratio? You know, like how much can you squat relative to your body weight? Say, as an example, if the person's a good squatter, you can look at that. And then like, okay, what's your standing broad jump look like? Okay, what's your standing 3 jumps look like? What does your overhead backwards with a 16-pound medicine ball look like? And we're trying to see where this person lines up in terms of relative strength versus reactive strength versus explosive strength versus starting strength, all these different types of things to see, and then figure out how does that apply to his sport or his position, and what do we need to work on most. And then we also have to look at like, what is this person's gifting, right? Because I've had some guys who literally, like, I could not get them to do eventually we did, but I couldn't get them to do a full body weight squat, like Astagraph's full squat with double their body weight. It was just an impossible thing to do. But I can get them a broad jump 11 feet 4 inches. Okay, so that's an elastic dude. Okay, and that dude is going to be able to do a whole lot of things, even though he's not as strong. Now, when I focus on getting a dude like that strong, he makes a big difference in all kinds of things. But when I got a dude who can squat 2.5 times his body weight, but he can only broad jump 9 feet 8, it's a whole different thing that I'm dealing with in terms of what I want to train and how I want to do it. So you just have to expose them to different types of training and testing activities that stresses different components of the strength that you want to do, and then figure out what the weakness is, figure out how that matches up with their gifting, figure out how that fits the demands of the sport, look at their level of competency, and make some decisions as to how to fix it. And the other thing I will say is that's an ongoing process. It is like a huge, every day is a new assessment, look at it, see what's going on, and then dial all that in. And then in addition to that, you have to figure out how his soft tissue quality is affecting all of those things. Because every one of those things is drastically affected by your level of recovery and your level of soft tissue quality. So sometimes guys respond to strength training in a relatively negative way in terms of tissue quality, just in terms of the amount of work that it gets. Not all guys, but some guys do. They'll get stiffer easier. Takes a longer time for them to recover. Their tissues tend to get more like compliant, which is, and sometimes you want, and less elastic sometimes. And even when we train through full ranges of motion, that can still happen. And so you got to be mindful from that, from a therapy point and from a training point. But it's a big factor. You know, it's the quality of the tissue determines how elastic and reactive that you can be. And in athletics, reactivity and elasticity is huge.
Yo, are those women's sandals?
Hold up. These sandals are rooted in millennia of masculinity. Pretty much all the ancient Greek warriors wore them.
Also, the ancient Aztec warriors used to wear them into battle. They're called cacti.
The Zulu warriors would march hundreds of miles in them.
And so did the Romans. They conquered a bit of land themselves.
That's great to know.
Is that the new Victoria's Secret drop?
Grab your Flex sandal now at powerproject.live.
Are you big on checking out like a bunch of matrix from like people wearables and checking HRV and anything like that? Do you mess with stuff like that?
No, I don't really. HRV has a place. I don't use it a lot. And wearables are extremely unreliable in terms of the accuracy of the information and even how repeatedly accurate they are too. So I don't rely on any kind of wearables at all.
You rely on just interaction. You see the guy coming in, you worked with him yesterday. his eyes are down and he's like not looking at you and he's kind of hiding in the corner with his hoodie on, like, you know, that maybe yesterday was like a rough a rough workout for him, or he's not in the same mood to train as normal. And then maybe through some of the warm up is where you do a little evaluation on exactly what's going to go on for the day.
That's pretty darn close to it. Yep. And so what happens a lot is we're doing some type of, call it therapy, in the warm up. Okay, so we're going through stuff, we're seeing stuff, and we're putting inputs into the system as we do it. That input might be some type of hands-on stuff. It might be some type of stretch stuff. It may be body tempering. It could be a whole bunch of it, but we're putting inputs into the system and seeing how the body is reacting to it. Okay, we're also getting a chance to put our hands on soft tissue and feel the quality of it. You know, you can sometimes put your hands on a guy's hamstring and be like, oh my goodness, this thing is stiff as crap. Or like, this feels like butter. You know, you can get all those ideas. And then you do some work on him, then he moves. He gives you feedback. You do some work on him, he moves again. And you're sort of dialing in the system as you go, putting different inputs in there and having him move in real time to see what it does. And it's fantastic for getting an idea of the athlete's readiness for that session and what you should do. Should you scrap the session altogether? Should we change it? Should we, like, how would we address volume and intensity? Like, you can get all that information from that. And then doing that repeatedly over time, you're learning about the athlete. You're teaching the athlete how to learn about himself, to communicate that to you. And you're essentially creating a roadmap or a guideline for what specific inputs work for that athlete for these particular situations. And over time, as you learn the athlete's body and he learns his body, you can figure out, this is the best way to recover. This is what we do best. This is how, when we're not recovered, this is what helps us the most. This is, okay, we did this volume of training yesterday, and holy shit, this is what his body's like today. We probably did too much volume yesterday. Let's dial that back the next time and see what we're dealing with and all those types of things. Or maybe there's some environmental stressors that we're not taking into consideration. How are you sleeping? How are you eating? All those types of things. It's just a constant communication and evaluation of what's happening. And then we go from there.
As a young coach, when you were starting out, is this something that you didn't think about as much, like how happy or unhappy the guy is, or the psychology of things? Might have just been like, we're going to do a 5x5, we're going to do box squats because I heard those were good.
Yes, as a young coach, there was more of that. I mean, I was very blessed to have some really good mentors when I was younger that kind of taught me the ways about that and how to evaluate these things. And so I wasn't as far behind. And even when I was really young in high school and stuff, I had some coaches that were like Eastern Bloc defectors, and they were like, the stuff that they were telling me, I didn't realize what the gold was at the time that I was getting until I kind of had to go away and see some other people. And I was like, you guys are morons. Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And then I kind of, that was my first realization of like, oh, wait a minute. This is like, there's different ways to do this. And there's some people out there that really have knowledge. You know what I mean?
What kind of stuff was it? I'm just curious. Like, what was it that you're hearing that you're like, that's fucking crazy?
Well, just the idea of, for instance, like the amount of volume that they wanted to do for training, especially as related to running training, as opposed to like technical stuff and intensity stuff, and just teaching techniques, little things like, you know, setting up starting blocks and how you come out and what you do. It's like they didn't really have a clue about the science behind it. It was just, this is kind of what somebody told me, so I'm going to show you how to do this and that, and this is how it's going to work. And they didn't have like a real good understanding of it. And a lot of the training was run straight, turn left, keep going. You know, the more we can pound you, the better it's going to turn out without any kind of real solid understanding of what was behind it. Whereas the Eastern Bloc guys, they were a lot more like technique first, short to long, get explosive, then do the other things. It wasn't, the mindset of just mindlessly doing anything wasn't really there, you know. And so that is something that I realized, you know, pretty early on. And just, you know, I guess I was just blessed in a lot of ways. I mean, this is a funny story. I was like probably, I don't know, 13 years old maybe. And at that time, I was like in a little Catholic junior high school. And it was like the extent of the sports was, hey, tomorrow's track and field day, or next week is track and field day, whatever came out. And so I was pretty good at track at that. So you'd go out, you'd run the the school thing and win that, and then go to regionals, win that, zone, city, win that, just keep going on through the whole thing, right? But so I decided like I was going to train, okay? I didn't know shit about training, whatever, right? I had this Runner's World magazine that I bought, and it talked about some guy doing 100 rep squats and this and that, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't know. I'm in my room, I'm doing 100 rep squats, and after reading this magazine, right? And my dad hears something's going on, right? So he comes in and says, "What are you doing?" So I kind of explained to him. I told him, and he's like, he looked at me. I don't know what he was thinking at the time, but in my mind, it was a look of disgust on his face. He's like, "What are you doing?" He goes, No. 10 minutes later, I was in his little dinky weight room we had there with this old Joe Weider cement weights with all that shit down there, doing split snatches and squats and all that stuff. He's like, "That's what you got to do if you want to run fast." And I was like, okay, at the time I thought he was crazy. But I look back on that now and I'm going, that was pretty cool.
He was talking about.
Yeah.
He knew how to do some Olympic lifting even?
Oh yeah, because that's
that's
what
amazing.
they did back in his day. So it was like, literally I was doing split snatches probably 10 minutes after that. It was pretty funny.
Oh my God. Who were some of your mentors?
Well, Charles Poliquin was a big mentor for me. And Dan Paff, a great track and field coach, was another huge mentor for me. I think in terms of my philosophies, I would say those two guys are the biggest influences for sure on me. And I think I'm probably a blend of their two philosophies and just adding in pieces of what I figure works and doesn't work as I kind of move along. I'd say they're my two biggest.
What do you think some of the things that someone like Marinovich had right, and maybe what are some things that maybe he had wrong? Because they have some really cool training methods.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking lots of the plyometrics and the jumping and stuff like that. I think that stuff is great. I think it can be overdone, but introducing that early, I think, is super good. There's a common belief especially in America, that you have to have a certain amount of strength before you start doing plyometrics. And it's commonly thrown out there that you got a body weight squat or squat your body weight 2 times before you start plyometrics or do this and that. And that's so bullshit. It's not even funny. If you go to any playground in America, you're going to see kids doing plyometrics all over the place. They can't squat their body weight and they're doing great. Like we kind of underestimate how strong you have to be to start doing that type of stuff. And just the kind of breaking down of that and getting in and doing all that explosive work and all the jumping work and all that, I think that stuff, that's a great thing. The volumes of stuff that those guys did, I mean, I think it's hard on a lot of people. I think there could also be more of a straight up strength training component to that, you know? And then it can't be a one size fit all. You have to figure out how much that stuff's used and who to use it for and all those type of stuff. But I think in terms of pushing forward the idea of like using elastic strain energy and getting tendons strong and dynamic for sport, I think it was great for that type of stuff.
What about training with like a tempo? I know that's a big thing of like Charles Poliquin, but I think sometimes when it comes to training for a sport, we get a little confused. You know, you're like, well, why would I really do like a full range of motion squat if, the knee's not bending that much in almost every sport? Like I'm not getting in that position. Sometimes people think that way. And then also like, Charles Poliquin, he would have a tempo a lot of times with a lot of things, but there's specific reasons for it. So I think we get confused. What's some of your process? Like, do you go in with like an intent? Like this person's going to do this full range of motion squat because it's going to equal this. And this person is going to be utilizing a tempo specifically for this movement because it's going to equal that.
Yes, sort of. So first we'll deal with the full range of motion. I think in terms of joint health, in terms of tissue quality, in terms of being able to be strong at end ranges to protect yourself, and also being strong at end ranges so that you sort of disinhibit the nervous system from trying to protect you when you have to be fast at those end ranges. Yeah. That stuff is crucial. You know what I mean? And if you never get there, then you're going to miss a big piece of it. Now, there's a space for doing other things like low box step ups, half squats, all those types of things. But I like to use that stuff later in the season. It's way easier to recover from that stuff. It's specific. You can get strong. It's great. But the big range of motion stuff, I like to keep in for long periods of time, start them early, and get people into those positions. It also challenges you from a mobility perspective, and it forces you to fix certain things and exposes you to certain things that you may not even realize you have an issue with. And it can change your mindset on what you need to focus on too. Like, example, squatting, for instance, at full depth and doing those types of things. It can really open up your eyes and realize the level of ankle mobility that you don't have.
I've noticed that a while
what
ago.
you need to do. And like, it's funny to me how people focus so much on bracing for squatting and bracing for deadlifting and doing all that type of stuff. But they ignore it, but they don't put the same type of emphasis on what ankle mobility does. And I have seen poor ankle mobility mess up more people's backs than a lack of bracing has ever done. And the funny part about this is we know this intuitively. So think about it this way. How many times have you took a person who's having trouble squatting, said, let's go over here and let's work on some bracing techniques. Bing, 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 do a couple things, wada, yada, and come back, put them on the squat rack, and they go, holy shit, I can't believe how good that looks. That's happened 0 times to me ever in my life, okay? How many times have you taken the guy and said, you know what, let's put some wedges on your heel. And you go, holy shit, you can squat and you can do load, right? So right there, you already know intuitively how important that is, but people don't focus on it. And
the lack of mobility in the ankle is going to lead someone to move a different way, right?
100%.
They can no longer lower themselves the way they need to. And so therefore they may lean forward or do whatever they need to do to try to get low enough.
Exactly right, which is going to cause more issues that can't be fixed by bracing. And so, I mean, little things like that get exposed when you start doing all this full range of motion stuff, and it forces you to fix a lot of things, which ultimately have carryover to other things, right? So, at the end of the day, being able to be in an accelerating position with your knee over your toe on the ball of your foot driving requires a ton of ankle mobility, which can be trained by doing full depth squats if you're properly addressing the ankle mobility as you go. So there's carryover in that sense, even though you might not see a carryover from a specific hip and knee angle, but it all matters. And like I said, the progression should always be full range of motion to a partial range of motion. The other thing is, in terms of hypertrophy, you're talking about stretch-mediated hypertrophy, which means you need to go through a full range of motion to create that stretch. Hypertrophy is not always the goal, but if it is the goal, that's definitely something to consider. And then when you're talking about sports where you're going to be forced into positions of deep flexion, big extension, whatever the case may be, you need to protect yourself. So you need to expose yourself to those things and expose yourself with load so that you can properly protect yourself. And that's a huge factor for range of motion training.
There have been multiple times where you've mentioned soft tissue quality, and I hope we spend some time on it because, one thing you notice is even if you like athletes that are maybe they're super focused on powerlifting and you touch their muscles, there's like tension. It's like it's hard. You can't get anywhere, right? So some people will take that and be like, okay, well, if these athletes lift too much, they become too stiff and then they can't be a good athlete. But you mentioned something where there's certain athletes that have a different response to strength training. You work with athletes that they can lift a lot, but their tissue quality doesn't change. And then some have a bad reaction to a lot of strength training. So first off, how can an athlete tell if they don't have good tissue quality if they're an athlete? How can they improve their tissue quality? And what do you notice with athletes that have bad tissue quality? I asked too much shit there, but we'll be able to talk about it quite a bit.
Okay. So what I see most is, before we even get into tissue quality, let's go back to the big, stiff guy that you're talking about. So part of that is a specific adaptation that he needs to do what he needs to do. He needs to be stiff like this. So if we look at the best power lifters in the world, they're some of the most dysfunctional people out there for anything else other than doing what they need to do.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's the specific adaptation to a sport. So some of that is going to happen. But now coming back to the soft tissue thing is I see it show up most in reactive stuff. When you have to be reactive, like bounce, jump, run, those types of stuff, because the tissues need to be able to like contract and then relax as quickly as possible and repeat that process over again. And you need to be able to use reactivity to assist in that process. So let's say, for instance, I'm going to go like this. I'm going to bang my finger down on the thing like this as hard as I can go and go as many times as I can. I can get pretty good and I can go pretty fast and try really hard, but I'm never going to be able to go as fast or as hard as if I can do this. Okay?
Yeah.
So that is loading the tissue, storing energy, and then having it be elastic and make it work. Okay. So now imagine if this tissue was like, say, a rubber band, but the rubber band was cold. It just came out the fridge. It's not going to do this very well.
Could snap.
Could snap. It's for sure not going to do it as well as if it was warm. Bad tissue quality is like having this thing cold. Okay. If I have to go like this with my bicep, okay, if my tricep is super tight, I may as well have a weight in my hand because I'm overcoming the stiffness in my triceps to do this. Now, when that becomes a multi-joint system of a whole bunch of things moving in a huge agonist and antagonistic setups, then your ability to relax antagonistic muscles so the agonist can fire better and then switch back and forth between those two things, it's crucial to developing fast and reactive movement. And so part of that is a skill thing. No question, it's a nervous system skill thing. But part of it is dependent upon the quality of your soft tissue. And the more your sport demands that type of movement, the higher the premium on the soft tissue quality. And then you'll notice it show up in those types of activities a lot more than you'll notice it show up in weightlifting type activities. And so that's one way to tell is how are you doing on other things,
Can slow training build speed?
Slow training, what do you mean by slow training?
Like a 4-second eccentric on a squat or something like that?
Yes and no. So a big part of speed training is the eccentric component. And the hard part about training the eccentric is that it's stronger than the concentric, right? So how can you get enough load on to do eccentric training properly? And one of the ways to do that is you can't, so you put it over a long period of time. That's a great way to start off. It's a great way to start building all that eccentric
Stronger
strength.
there, so have more of a stimulus by just slowing it down a little bit.
Yeah, but then you need to go into something that's a much faster eccentric action for that to really carry over, And what's interesting is certain type like yielding plyometrics, yielding isometrics, where you're like holding a weight, not which overcoming, but you're holding it and stopping you from collapsing. More and more research shows that actually is behaving more like a very fast eccentric contraction. So those things can work really well to do that. And then doing things like we talked about before, where there is a fast stretch shortening cycle, like the plyometrics, the sprinting, all those types of things, trains that eccentric activity really quickly. So having a long time under tension is not a bad thing. It's a good thing, and it's a great base to start your eccentric training from. And it's also a good hypertrophy stimulus. But in terms of having really good speed carryover, you have to progress to a way faster eccentric load. You know what I mean? That's no different than sometimes people will use bands to yank them down through a really fast eccentric and try to bounce out from it. Or having like weight releasers so that you can overload that eccentric with load rather than with time. And then all those different types of things. It's another way of getting a faster eccentric going, if that makes sense.
Improving your sleep quality is as easy as shutting your mouth. And what I mean by that is putting some tape on, breathing through your nose will increase your sleep quality. It's no longer just something that only the bros do. It's now been researched, and people understand that if you can breathe through your nose while you're asleep, you'll have better sleep quality and you will wake up more rested. Hostage tape is also really awesome because I know what I used to do. I used to use a little bit of a cheaper tape, and every time I'd wake up in the morning, the tape would be somewhere else on the bed or on my face, but it wouldn't be on my mouth anymore. But hostage tape, if you have a beard or if you don't, will stay comfortably on your mouth all through the night. And if you're someone who has a problem breathing through your nose, Hostage also has nose strips. So you can place those on your nose while you're asleep, or if you want to be like one of those Hormozy guys, you can wear it during the day. Andrew, how can they get it?
Yes, that's over at hostagetape.com/power project, where you guys will receive an entire year's supply of mouth tape and the nose strips for less than $1 a night. Again, that's over at hostagetape.com/power project. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
Is there an advantage of having hypertrophy? Like having bigger legs, will that potentially help you run faster, help you move faster? Or is it more about being stronger and more elastic?
Yes, having a bigger leg can help you run faster, but it has limitations because you've got to move all that weight. You've got to fuel all that, Mm-hmm. And so, but in short, yes, because you have cross-sectional area of the muscle, and then you've got the nervous system innervation of that. So you've got how well the nervous system communicates in terms of firing frequency, coding and synchronization, all these types of things that are happening. How fast are you going to send the message there? How coordinated is the message? So I'm going to tell my arm to do this. So I send a message to my biceps. Okay, boom, it does this. And then there's the other part of it, whereas if I've got thousands of these motor units. Okay. So let's just say that for simple purposes, there's only 10 in my bicep. Okay. So I'm sending this message to these 10 guys. I'm doing it really quickly. But now I need these 10 guys. If you look at it as a tug of war, the 10 guys have to all pull at the same time for that force to summate for me to get the max force. They're not in time. So I've got to get all that lined up. Okay. Then I got to worry about, okay, while I'm doing this, am I relaxing the backside so that I'm not fighting against each other? All those things have to train. So you have all these nervous system qualities that you're training, but you're still going to be somewhat limited by the cross-sectional mass you have. So both of them are factors. It's just a matter of where you are. If the athlete already has sufficient cross-sectional mass and it's a nervous system problem, adding more mass is not necessarily going to help him. The other thing is when you don't, even if you have some mass, but it might not be as much as you would like to have, it puts more stress on your nervous system because you just have to do more work that would be easier with if you had more cross-sectional mass. Here's a classic example. When I was training for a bobsled, I was pretty light, and I was always trying to get heavier and heavier and heavier because that's just kind of the way I started out. And one of the things for me was I didn't have enough mass on my legs at the time, but I was extremely dialed in and wired from a nervous system perspective, okay? So for me, if I was going to go to the gym and we're going to do a back squat, anything less than probably double my body weight was a waste of time. It just wasn't even really work for me. So the amount of load I would put on my nervous system to get a workout was huge. Once I gained more mass and I had more cross-sectional area to do that, it totally changed how fatigued I got from doing those workouts because now I had more cross-sectional area helping me do that stuff. It wasn't as super nervous system intensive to move all the weights all the time. And so my strength to weight ratio slightly diminished as I put on more mass.
What did you weigh?
I mean, I was as light. The very first bobsled camp I went to, I was 177 pounds, tiny.
Squatting 400 easy?
500.
500.
Yeah.
There you go.
And so that's funny. I don't know if I ever told you that story. That's how I first met Charles, actually. Did you know that?
No, I did not.
So I was making the transition to bobsled. It was 1994. And I went to Calgary to do this camp that kind of got sprung on me, right? I didn't even really know that it was coming. The night before, I met Charles at his house. We were talking and stuff like that. Obviously, I knew who he was. We got into all kinds of science stuff. We were bro talking. It was pretty cool, right? Yeah. And then I was there with another guy who was also going to try out. He was a big dude. And he's probably big. He was probably only 220, but to me, he was big at the time, right? And we both came. So the next day, he had to leave to go out to Montreal to do some contract stuff he had. So he wasn't there for the testing. So they had some modified testing, and we did back squats that day for some reason. When every area of the test was always a front squat. So that day, I was 177 pounds, and I back squatted 500 pounds, classic 401 tempo type stuff like you had set up for all the testing, right? Ass to grass type stuff. And then they sent the results out to Charles in Montreal. And Charles called back the next day and said, hey, wait a minute. Was this the little skinny black dude that did this or the big white dude? This is like confusing. I'm not understanding what's going on here. And they're like, no, it was the little skinny black dude. And they're like, okay. He's like, give me his number. And that's basically how we started.
He's like, I need to know this guy.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. Yeah.
Yo. Plus that tempo, you were going down for 4 seconds.
Yeah. He was pretty strict about that in testing, yeah.
Well, I'm curious about this. Mark did ask about it, but what do you think, if applied correctly, can be the importance of tempo for people? Because the reason why I ask is like, I notice when some lifters lift, there seems to be no intention with the way they do their reps. So it's kind of like they're just going through the motions and they're not maybe really feeling certain things where they could be, or like feeling tension where they could be trying to like get some tension. So how do you think lifters should think about using tempo?
That's a great question. One of the things that it's good for is reinforcing position and technique. You know, obviously, especially under a load, if you slow the tempo down and feel where you are in space for everything, you're going to be way better off. And as loads get really heavy and near max, even though the temptation is to like drop as fast as you can so that you can get some momentum to go, that almost always fails because you lose position. You have to. That's when you have to get slow and tight and be focused on exactly where you are all the time to go. And slowing the tempo down really helps you do that. So it teaches you a lot of stuff. It's great. I think also if you're doing a lot of other training outside that's very fast and eccentric and all the time, then this is another alternative way to get a stimulus to make it work. And I think those are the big benefits of it, you know, and obviously the hypertrophy stimulating effect.
Yeah. Is there a little benefit to just having less weight? You know, because it might just be like less overtrained and maybe the body's not getting, it's still challenging. You know, it's going to make you sore and stuff like that, but maybe there's less stiffness because now you have 20 or 30 less pounds on the bar because you're moving it with a intent.
Yeah, but that is a good point. But I think what you'll find is the longer and longer you train with those types of tempos, it doesn't work that way. You can handle huge weights and sometimes more weight when you have that slow tempo control. So it doesn't quite work. In the beginning it does, but after time it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah.
What you got going on over there, Andrew?
We've been talking about so much, and I mean, you are probably the best coach that I can even think of. You know so much about so much.
He's overqualified to be on this podcast, so you can just say
I
it.
don't know about all that.
Well, I would agree with you, Mark, to be honest. But you said something in the gym, and it kind of blew my mind, and it was almost heartbreaking. But when you were kind of saying, like, if you were a young coach and if you wanted to be successful, this is what you had to do. Can you reiterate what you were explaining?
Yeah. I was saying that if you're a young coach now, like you really get out now, and you want to become successful, and we define successful as, you know, doing well financially, being well known, however we're going to define that success. The simple truth of the matter is that your path to being successful is going to be infinitely faster and probably ultimately higher if you focus on learning everything you can about algorithms and social media than sports science. And that's just the sad truth of where we are. You know what I mean? And that concerns me for where the future of this goes. But I guess the flip side of that is maybe it's some good information that might reach a whole lot more people. So I guess there is some trade-off there, but it's definitely a concern.
Yeah, it'll probably be easier for the coaches that truly love to coach to be able to, like, I don't know, people will eventually be able to read through the BS and they'll be able to see like the phonies and the fakes, because as the likes, you know, start to dwindle or whatever, like they kind of fade off. But the guys that are still instructing really good information are still going to rise to the top no matter what.
If they get the audience.
I hope,
I would say maybe sticking on that topic a bit, like who are some coaches that are like a little underground that maybe more people should know about?
Oh, that's a good question.
Because a lot of the coaches are like, especially track coaches. It seems like they're like really buried under. And I think
for sure.
I think maybe some of them want to kind of be hanging out down there. But are there a couple you can kind of think of that we should be checking out?
I think that since you mentioned the track coaches and the speed coaches type thing, I think I don't know if these guys are so much underground, but I think certainly in many communities they are. Is Altus. And they have they're like a track type based group, but they do all types of speed type work and they're really based on coach education, and they do some really good stuff there. And obviously that's Dan Paff is the guy who's really behind that, but now Stuart McMillan is really taking it over and running it. Dan's kind of packing it in a little bit, but he's still really involved. And I think they do a really good job in terms of unpacking the science and teaching people the right way to go about learning about things in terms of speed, as far as speed development goes. I think they're really good at that, and I think that's something that if someone is interested in that would go. And I think they do a lot. I know they do internships and those types of things, which is really good. And I think that is another key message I would say for the young people is you got to get out there. You got to find mentors. You got to do the work. You got to spend the time. You got to sacrifice some money in the beginning and just learn what you got to learn, because it's not as easy as you think it is. And what happens now is people try to create a system for everything and a checkbox for everything, so that because those things become scalable and they become saleable. But in real high level performance coaching, there isn't really a system and a checkbox. It's learning the underlying components, and so that you can create systems to fit athletes, and learning how to like manipulate those and manage them in real time, and going through like that's a big factor. I think you just have to say, okay, I realize that what I want is a 10-year internship to get where I want to go, and I can't get it from a TED Talk. That's just how it's going to be. I got to put in the time. I got to get it. That's that. And the other thing that I would say is that, and I try to do this a lot, as a strength coach, as a speed coach, whatever, I sit back and I say, okay, what is it that I think I know, that I'm sure about? This stuff is immutable. This is what it is. And then I spend time questioning that. Because that's where you go wrong, right? It's the old Mark Twain. It's not what you don't know. It's what you think you know that just ain't so, right? And so you got to be careful as a coach. If you want to like learn and grow, questions are more important than answers, okay? And I've had some people come to me and do internships over years and stuff like that. And some of them love it. Some of them are really frustrated about it because they always leave with more questions instead of answers. And I think that's great. Some of them is great, but some of them just get real frustrated because they wanted a cookie cutter of this. I can go back and apply this. And this
they might even see something that you're doing, and they might ask you and say, "Oh, okay, this is how we do it." And you're like, "For now,
that's exactly right.
This is the best I got for now."
Yeah,
right?
That's exactly right. And that's a like got to be acceptable and good answer that you kind of have to learn. You have to. And so I do try to spend some time, and it's hard because you're married to these things, and you've got your own confirmation biases, and you got to try and work through those. But you can go a long time running up this ladder and find out it's leaning against the wrong wall. And that's just not what you wanted to do. And I think that happens a lot in our industry. And there's also a pull between like, oh, we're this evidence-based guy and our science, this and that, versus like, this is what's really happening and stuff. And you got to follow the science. You got to be with it. But that stuff is 15 years behind what people are really doing. Like, so you have to be mindful of stuff, understand it, really respect the opinions of some of the science stuff that's coming out. But you also have to know, okay, I've seen this and I've done this, and this is what it did for this, and understand it. So like, that's the example I use all the time. Like, I know grass is green, okay? So if you want to talk to me about studies that tell me that grass might not be green, I don't give a shit what you got to say. Now, if you want to tell me that the whole idea of chlorophyll is not right, that's not why grass is green, I'm ready to listen to all that stuff. But when you start talking about stupid shit that says it's not green, I know, and honestly, sometimes some of the stuff that comes out from the science, evidence-based part of it is really that. It's trying to tell you that grass is not green. And that you have to be able to say, like, nope, I know what I know. But then there's other stuff where it goes, I should really question why this is happening, and that can get me other answers. And it's key to evaluate that and understand it so you don't go chasing down the wrong rabbit holes. I'm kind of all over the place here, but those are kind of how I think about the world, I suppose.
No, that's really well said. Yeah. It's hard to figure out what's true or what's real about a certain thing. I mean, we see so much in fitness. It's changing all the time, which is a great thing. Mm-hmm. We see a lot of people, doing more like, functional stuff. What are some of your thoughts on people they're not really lifting the same way they used to? There's memes now like of showing the gyms from the 80s versus showing some of the stuff that's going on today. And I think maybe some of it is, it looks like some people are trying to maybe instill some more athleticism, maybe bring some more movement into their lifestyle or into their fitness. But one thing I have noticed is that there seems to be more people doing it because it does seem to be more inviting than a bench squat or deadlift.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what you're seeing is a swing in the pendulum. It's been so far the other way, and people have pushed the whole, you need to be strong on these lifts and it fixes everything. Squat double your body weight, look your cancer. Doesn't matter. Just like whatever. That's just that.
But it will.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, people have gone the other way and they've gone too far. I think that's normally how we work. We have something goes too far, you see it. It might be politics, it might be whatever. Something happens, it goes too far one way, then the reaction to it is just so far the other way. And some of the stuff you're doing, you're seeing, okay, it's great. It's highlighting the fact that we've been missing a component of training that's very useful for what we want to do. But it's gone so far the other way now that it's made its point, but now it's gone into craziness. It's just not applicable. But I will say this, though. If some people just like doing that and they gravitate towards that and it's great and it gets them going, do it all day long. I don't really care, because if it's being sedentary or doing that, then do that. But when you're talking about sport performance and ideal setups, then you have to get into a whole different category of what that stuff can and can't do. Mm-hmm. So that makes sense.
When it comes to like some of this stuff, it's great for a lot of people to get in. It's great for a lot of people to, especially if they haven't been moving their body, they can start moving. But when it comes to like an athlete you're working with, an elite level athlete, college, high school, NFL pros, may not be enough stimulus for that individual.
It may not be enough stimulus, or it may be the wrong stimulus.
Maybe the wrong stimulus. Okay.
And so it's just a matter of, again, it's one of the things that some of these things can address is increasing the athlete's level of competency to be able to do things. Okay. So when the athlete is missing some of that stuff, it can help with that. But in terms of training for the demands of its sport, it's going to do very little to help that. So you kind of have to make that differentiation and see what can help you the most from that type of stuff.
Kind of curious about, one thing that we've gotten into a lot for the past few years has been like breathing. We started getting into like nasal breathing like back in 2016. Mm-hmm. That made a big difference for my endurance in jiu-jitsu and recovery and sleep. But I'm curious, when your athletes are lifting, and the reason why I ask this is because I notice when a lot of athletes lift, whether they're new or whether they've been in the gym for a while, it seems to be like there's movements where they're really holding their breath a lot. I know they need to create stiffness, but I wonder, do you pay attention to the way your athletes breathe when they do things under load? Do you give them any cues in that, or not really?
Yes, for sure. We pay attention to it from the perspective of, like you said, creating stiffness, but also from creating the ability to relax and the ability to recover. And so that's another thing we talked about, like the sort of core stiffness or the bracing component versus ankle mobility and stuff. One of the things about all the stiffness, core bracing type stuff is it doesn't travel well. So in other words, it's great for squatting and that's about it. Okay. So you can't have somebody running running 100 meters who needs to have a high degree of stiffness for sure, but they can't brace the same way to run 100 meters as you're doing trying to squat because you'll burn out by 30. It's a whole different, you'll be too damn stiff. It's a whole different time. But there's still a need for bracing in that sense. So, and part of that is a breathing thing. And part of it is, can you breathe properly, not just from a recovery perspective, but so that you can have a certain level of stiffness that you need, but still be able to like function like for long periods of time and get in the air you want to do. And then there's also the idea of breathing in the recovery phase and how, you know, how that works too. Like, can you become a better nose breather and will that help your recovery? There's all those types of things. And then there's even breathing in soft tissue for me. So like if let's say I'm on you and I've got a 135-pound roller on you and I'm tempering your quads and we're going through a spot and it's like you're in a brutal spot. Okay. If I say, okay, wait a minute, I'm going to start rolling this thing. We're going to do some box breathing. You're going to breathe in for a 5-second count and you're going to hold it for a 5-second count. And then we're going to breathe it out for 5 seconds. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to roll this and I'm going to make sure that I get this tempering tool to the point of where it's the worst for you as you're trying to hold it. So we roll to find that spot. That's when you're holding, and we'll leave it on there, and then you relax and you breathe it out. We just go through a series of box breathing, moving through that type of soft tissue work. That can have drastic effects on how quickly your muscles soften up. So breathing from that perspective is a factor too. Mm-hmm. Stretching, like learning how to breathe while you're going through stretching, whether it's static stretching, dynamic stretching, whatever, all those types of things respond to breathing. And so, yeah, it's important to cue that and use it the best way you can. It gets tricky when it's like a super complex, fast-moving type of stuff because you can't be thinking about your breathing at that point in time. But if you've practiced it doing enough low-level things, then it can usually carry on.
And it can become kind of like second nature if you've done it enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It becomes second nature for sure.
And then maybe even if you had a reason for it, you can breathe like during an exercise, right? Like you're doing a squat, you could hang out at the bottom if it's appropriate weight, let all your air out, and right. I mean,
100%.
If you have a reason for it, you're trying to have more mobility, or you're trying to have whatever desired result you're looking for. You know, sometimes what you're looking for is just better range of motion. Like just do the lift better, do the lift differently, or squat a little deeper. And a great way to squat deeper is let some of that air out.
For sure. Like, let's not forget, that's not new. 50 years ago, we were doing breathing squats and pullovers, you know, supersetting them to get an effect, you know. So it's great stuff.
Expand the rib cage.
For sure. Right? Yeah.
I wanted to ask kind of about what Mark mentioned there, because I do a lot of that stuff where I'll like squat with a load and I'll breathe at the bottom while also maintaining stiffness enough where I don't lose position and I come out, because in grappling, you're never going to hold your breath in grappling. You do that, you're fucked. Like you're royally fucked. What are your thoughts on like how that could be beneficial, like, and what benefit it could bring, or maybe why it might not be so useful? Like, what are your thoughts on doing that type of stuff in general?
Well, I think learning to differentiate sort of breathing muscles from bracing muscles is a key thing, and you can work with that in that. It just when you don't want to do it on a huge load. Because on a huge load, you want to be protected maximally. But trying to do that is an ideal thing. And I think there are many ways to do it. I also think you can use your breathing to control your state of arousal. So if you need to get up, you're going to breathe differently than if you need to relax. And that could be before a lift. It could be after a lift to recover. All those things are affected by breathing. And so if you learn to control that, you learn to understand what the response is to that and what your stress response is to that, then you can learn to breathe those things away and breathe yourself into a certain level of readiness, whether that means you need to come up or you need to come down. Because some guys...
When you say up, you mean like nervous system or like coming up from a squat?
No, nervous system stuff.
Okay.
And some guys are naturally one way or the other too. So like, for instance, I'm the kind of person who I would need to calm myself. I can just sit in a chair, think about competing, and raise my heart rate 40 beats. It's just like I'm very excitable. Yeah. So for me, to do stuff that excites me is counterproductive. Because if you look at it as like an inverted U-dose curve, where like there's a certain level of excitement and performance, you get too excited, it starts to come down the other way, right? So for me, I would have to really sort of calm myself down. And for other guys, it's different. They got to like get up and go, you know? And so breathing, how you breathe can help you with that too.
What are some examples of that? Because like I think there's some people that can probably be like, oh yeah, I'm definitely the always excited one. And there's some people like me who's like, I'm always the chill one, right? And I'm like, it's really hard for me to get myself revved up for shit. How do both athletes maybe need to handle their breath when it comes to that?
It's great. So I think that focusing on like long exhalations, like just breathing stuff out for a long time and slowing your breathing and doing those types of things are going to be really good for sort of like calming you down and centering you and getting there. But then just being very, like a quick type, stimulating type breathing can, you know, help you get the other way too. So it's a matter of learning like what works for you the most. And first of all, learning like who you are. Are you a really excitable guy that needs to calm down, or are you the opposite way around, you know? And that bleeds into like supplementation too. Like how are you going to use like some things that you might want to think that would really get one person up, might take the person up too far and take them down the other side of the curve. So there's that to figure out in there as well. But I think learning and utilizing breathing techniques can really help with that.
Gotcha.
Power Project family, we love wearing Viora clothing for such a long time now because they're not only clothes that you can wear in the gym for some great workouts, like their Stratotech tanks, their tech tees, their Ponter Performance line, which is dream knit and super soft, but they also have clothes that you can wear on family gatherings, at home. Right now on the podcast, this is their Boulevard shirt jacket, which fits amazing, but it also has a bit of stretch to it. There's also their Range shirt jacket, which pretty much I wear on almost every other podcast too. But they have amazing tops and bottoms for men, especially now since the winter months are coming and you want to get into some warmer clothes. Check out their outerwear because their outerwear is so comfortable, but it also fits so well because it's made for somebody with an athletic body type like you guys. So, Andrew, how can they get their hands on it?
Yes, you guys got to head over to viori.com/powerproject. How the heck do you spell that? It's VUORI.com/powerproject. And you guys will automatically receive 20% off your order. Again, viori.com/powerproject. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
There's some ways to get your breathing kind of the way that you're mentioning through. You were mentioning the tempering. You know, so there's some way, like if you do tempering, that might get you to breathe quite a bit, right?
Yeah, it might teach you how to like breathe through like pain points, or and then get your brain connected to like how breathing affects tightness in your body. You know, like sometimes you can change like your overall resting muscle tone just by like how much you breathe, like just laying down and intentionally doing certain types of breathing can just totally relax you to a point where you kind of get up and start moving again and you're literally looser. You haven't stretched, you haven't done anything, but you just have overall less tension in your body.
And there's some weird shit you can do too, like physical manipulation, right? That I know you and Charles and some other people gotten into, where you like, you know, rub the chest or you do something painful to somebody, like pressure points in the face and stuff like that, right?
Didn't Charles pull your earlobe?
Those are
Charles pulling on my earlobe and taking the pen cap and digging it into my thumb.
Those are stimulatory things that you get in. You know,
it's
just, again, you're putting more inputs into the system and the body responding to it in different ways. And that happens with pain too. You know, there's certain things, and it's funny because we think about when we're doing, you know, soft tissue work or other things that we're doing, that we're going to relieve some pain by putting something into the system that changes tissue or changes movement, does something that's going to reduce your pain. But also, there's ways to put inputs into the system that might just be distracting inputs. Okay? So a good way to think about it is like this. Like I'm sitting around here, I'm standing now, I've been on and off of planes, I haven't had enough movement, my back is kind of stiff. I'm not really in pain, but I have like some sort of stiffness now, right? If I said, Andrew, come over here and hit me over the thumb with a hammer, my back's not going to hurt anymore, right? Because now I'm distracted by this here.
Andrew's a doctor,
right?
I can fix it. Yeah.
Exactly. So when we're putting obviously we're not trying to create pain somewhere else, but by putting some type of distracting input other places, it can reduce your perception of what that pain is doing there, and it gets going. And I mean, I guess we're going off on tangents now, but so much of this pain stuff is people underestimate the emotional and mental part of pain, and pain is related to training, pain is related to injury and all those types of things. But it is huge. You know what I mean? Like, I'll give you 2 examples. Okay. If you've ever raised kids, you know this. Okay. You got a 2-year-old kid. Normal, he runs around, he falls down, laughs, he gets up, it's not a big deal. You take that same kid when he is an hour late for his nap and falls down and does that, all of a sudden, it's a nightmare. It's like you just dropped him off a cliff, right? Because he's tired, he's in a whole different spot. That we don't lose that as we get older. We just internalize it and handle it. Right? So when you're tired and you're fatigued and you're hurt, like shit just hurts more, right?
Yeah.
You know? Or here's another example. Like, I see this all the time with football players, right? So we play a Monday night football game, okay? It's a knockdown, drag out, it goes to overtime, and we take like 80, 90 snaps, okay? We win that game. Shit hurts a lot less than when you lose that game. That's just how it is. That's a total emotional response to how these things are happening. And I think you see that with recovery too. You win that game, you recover faster and better than when you lose that game. You know, you have mental stress going on, you have all these things going on. It changes what your body's doing. So that stress, that emotional stuff, all that stuff affects your recovery and your preparedness. And so whatever you can do to manage that stuff, it's so much more than people give it credit for. Like it's a big component of managing training, in my opinion. That's overlooked.
If they lost Monday Night Football, then maybe when they come in Tuesday to work out, you just order some pizza, sit down, no training for the day.
I don't know. That might work. I don't know. But you definitely got to know. And like when I write programs for guys that are in season, it's a tricky thing to do because you're not there. You don't know what's happening week to you're communicating with them. But I always write 2 versions. Okay, so this is what we're going to try and do for our leg day early in the week. Say it's on a Monday after the Sunday game. Okay, but this is what you do if you feel good. And feel good, you can do multiple tests to figure out if you're feeling good. And this is what you do if you don't feel so good. And never try to do the one, never feel, and some guys you got to dial back all the time. Like you got a guy like a James Harrison. He's going to want to do no matter what. You got to literally try and stop him from doing that stuff, But it's really important if you don't dial that stuff in that stuff will catch up to you fast. You'll burn out pretty quick.
So that's kind of a way to, like, if an athlete doesn't feel necessarily good, or if they're on a constantly losing team, sometimes they're not feeling good, those not feel good workouts can give them a win because they're not crazy hard for them.
100%.
Yeah. Okay.
100%. And they're still getting through it. They're still maintaining or having some type of stimulus to try and maintain that strength as you go through. Another interesting segue into this too is with injury stuff. Okay. So people will get injured and they just get into the rehab and they're going and everything is, let's recover, let's get this fixed, let's put all this time into this. And what I find with those people is so much of that is negative energy because it's associated with this injury coming back from the injury. But if you let them go balls to the wall hard on a workout completely unrelated to that injury, that makes them feel like we're actually doing something and accomplishing something now, that significantly accelerates how fast they can recover from an injury. So let's say you've got like an MCL sprain that's going to put you out 3 weeks, you're going to come back and you're just hyper-focused on you doing the rehab. The guys who dial in and wait a minute, I got 3 weeks to get my upper body as ridiculously strong and swole as possible, and they work super hard at that while they're going through that rehab process, they get better faster than the guys who don't do that and they just focus on the rehab. And I think it's just a matter of you need to give yourself that positive accomplishment of I've been able to do this type thing, and it helps you recover better.
Do you think any supplements are helpful when someone does have a knee injury or Have you noticed, people talk about like curcumin and I don't know, there's all kinds of different supplements out there. I know you know a ton about them. Anything seem to help with like recovery from certain things like that?
Well, you mentioned curcumin, so we can start there. That's a interesting molecule that does some pretty cool things. And what's nice about it is it rolls around in your body in a conjugated state, so it's bound up. It's not really necessarily that bioavailable. But the chemicals that deconjugate that are overexpressed by inflammatory tissue. So when that stuff comes in contact with the inflammatory tissue, it can deconjugate it and start making so it's almost, I want to say magic bullety, but that type of concept in terms of how it can work, it can work great. I don't necessarily like to use that chronically all the time every day, but in spurts, it works really well. And it works nicely in combination with Boswellia, the two of them together, because Boswellia works more at the higher up level, the modifying cytokine responses. So it's almost like you get a combination of the general and the foot soldiers working together in this army fighting the inflammation and the issue from the injury. So that can work really good. I think another thing that's overlooked is just high protein and the demand for essential amino acids and high protein when you're coming back from an injury and trying to rebuild things. So that's another big thing I would look at with athletes that are coming off an injury.
Like having even extra protein on top of what they typically have?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then also another one is, especially when it's soft tissue stuff, is magnesium. It just has such a big effect on the tissue quality. And so many people are deficient in magnesium to begin with.
Specific type?
Glycinate is probably the best one. Some people will be able to take multiple different types of magnesium and not have an issue with it. And other people, it'll just be a laxative. The safest one, it's probably glycinate. It can work really well. And I think obviously if you're on that all the time, it's great. But sometimes increasing that dose when you have a particularly soft tissue injury can really be helpful with that type of stuff. I think certain enzymes can also be really good for breaking down some of the byproducts of inflammation. I like to use those. Serrapeptase is good, nattokinase is good, even bromelain can be good. So
these like pills?
Yeah, they're like you can get them in pills.
Supplements,
yeah.
Okay.
So again, it can be relatively specific to the type of injury that you want, but generally those things can work pretty well for injury.
Red light therapy, cold plunging.
Yep. Used correctly, all of those things can work well. What's red light therapy, infrared sauna, cold, contrast, hot.
You have a lot of the stuff at your gym.
All of it, yeah. PEMF, all these types of things can work. Just a matter of applying them correctly and for the right type of injury, and then also seeing the response to them, because some people respond differently to different things, and you have to know. But again, it's just a matter of playing with it. And really, another huge factor with some of these injuries is compression. Like people underestimate how much compression helps a ton. And even in the prevention of injuries too, in the warm up for injuries, compression can be huge.
Oh yeah, people have no idea how good an elbow sleeve or knee sleeve can feel. It can be totally change the way that you're working out if you have a little bit of an issue with the elbow or knee.
100%. And like extreme compression, like flossing and things like that can be fantastic for a lot of stuff.
What can like mild compression do over a long period of time? So let's say somebody has like, something in their elbow, wrist or whatever, and they choose to use some mild compression during the day or during workouts. What does that do?
It's a great question. In terms of the underlying like mechanism of action of how it works, I'm not sure that we fully understand that, but I can tell you this. Having that compression on that area, low compression for a long period of time, can do wonders, and sometimes it can work better than high compression for a short period of time. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. Part of me feels like when you put that compression on, it right away feels good. Like it feels like this is locked in where it's supposed to be.
Feels cozy.
Yeah, it's exactly right. That's what it feels like. And then your brain over time starts to like disinhibit. It's okay.
You're more aware.
Yeah, something is happening here, and this thing feels better. So whatever type of protection signals I'm sending, whatever type of governor I'm putting on that thing right now, I can maybe dial some of that back now because the feedback, I'm getting some afferent feedback here. It's telling me, hey, that thing that was biting, that thing that was reacting is different now. And wait a minute, it's still different 10 minutes later. And 2 hours later, it's still different. So wait, maybe I don't need to protect this person as much. Let me dial back some of the governor that I have on there. And that's how I think it's working. Although I can't pull out a scientific paper and say that's how it's working.
Yeah, I would say I think there's a few other things going on too, like especially if you're talking about like flossing. You know, you're talking about really wrapping it with tighter compression. Then I think you got those like sliding surfaces,
100%.
and it's a little bit like if you were manually doing like ART on somebody. In addition to that, I think what an elbow sleeve does is it kind of, in a weird way, makes your arms bigger. So if you can picture, like if you had a half-inch bigger forearm and a half-inch bigger bicep, well, now we got more compression, we got more torque, just as if you had more muscle or more fat. I mean, part of the reason why a powerlifter gets fatter or bigger is because a bigger muscle a lot of times is a stronger muscle, and a compressed muscle a lot of times will be a stronger muscle. So in my opinion, you also have that little extra cushion for the pushing kind of thing, because when you do something like a bench press, you're dropping your forearm onto your bicep, and that, even though it's just neoprene, it is supportive all the way to the point where sometimes some of these guys will wear sleeves that are so tight on their knees or on their elbows that they can barely bend, and it will be that supportive sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that 100%. I think I was referring in the previous comments to like the long-term leg compression, but with the flossing compression, that's all those gliding surfaces that you get to move against each other and crush that out. It's great. And in addition to that, with that is you're also getting a huge restriction of blood flow at that period of time. So what happens is you're going to get, as you're breaking down all these adhesions on these sliding surfaces, when you take it off, blood is going to come back in to pick that up. So it's basically a garbage out, groceries in type stuff when you get that. So what I like to do a lot with that is like extreme compression and really get
you've
stuff
wrapped
moving
me
left.
before. You've done some stuff to me before where it all hurts really bad.
Yeah.
Can you
Tell us
dive,
until it's done.
Go ahead.
Could you dive into that adhesion thing just a little bit, just because, and this is great, it's kind of like a theme now where we've had multiple people, because there's a lot of people in fitness that are like, you can't break up adhesions. The adhesions aren't a thing, that like that doesn't exist. Myofascial release doesn't do that. And then there's people who are like, we had a guy who worked with cadavers for 30 years who was like, adhesions are a thing. We've had a body worker that's worked with people for like over 2 decades who's like, I break up adhesions all the time. And now you have worked with people, athletes for like fucking 4 decades maybe, and you mentioned adhesions. So what do you mean?
Well, I mean, in terms of what the actual like morphological structure of adhesion is and whether that's what it is or if it is really some kind of neuropathic thing in nature or whatever it is, when I use the word, I use it to mean some type of blockage or interference in the way normal anatomical movement should occur, you know? And so when we're saying we're breaking down adhesions, do I literally mean that we're breaking down a piece of connective tissue? It doesn't always mean that way. Sometimes it could simply mean that we are, like, fascia is made up of a lot of microtubules that are full of water, okay? And sometimes they just get so dried out and worked out, literally the fascia is sort of dehydrating. And sometimes what we're doing, we're just compressing the crap out of this and we're opening that stuff up, and now it's going to get some hydration back into this thing that it hasn't had in it for a long time. And so are you breaking down an adhesion? Was there an adhesion in there? Was it just less pliable? What are you doing? I'm not really sure, but I don't know that it matters. I think the concept of doing the work to get all that stuff happening is the point. And whether or not that's truly an adhesion or not and how we define an adhesion, to me is not important.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
When I went to your gym, you were explaining to my wife and I, her shoulder was bothering her from swimming, and you were talking about the fascia, and you were talking about how the body kind of has this like sling pattern to it, and how it's very common that when somebody has like a left shoulder, sometimes the right hip and so on. Can you explain some of that to us?
Yeah, so that's relatively complicated stuff. But yeah, the fascia does work in slings that communicate to each other, and this whole series of microtubules, how they actually communicate to each other. And some of that communication can happen faster than what happens within the central nervous system. That's how good the communication is. So when you have things that are out of whack or things that are tight in one place and fascia is not moving well, it creates a problem throughout the whole sling. And that creates a sort of a movement pattern deviation or a movement aberration. And then over time, if that aberration is causing problems, then that can also be a source of irritation in addition to just the state of the fascia as well. And the whole thing just starts to add up. And like addressing those things it's important. It's not, I think if you address all the things individually, it should add up to changing the whole thing on the sling. But having a knowledge to be able to like back up and take a little bit more of a macro approach and see what's going on is really helpful with addressing that type of stuff. And that's kind of what we try to do with assessing movement, you know. And that's one of the things that coaches and even sometimes therapists don't do very well anymore is analyze movement. Because in order to do that, you first have to have a mindset of we need to analyze movement of all types of things in real time. And then you also have to have an understanding of the mechanics of the particular thing you're trying to analyze with in real time. And that's not always there. And what's happened is over the years, we've developed things like functional movement screens and all these other types of things like that are taught to young trainers and young therapists as this tool to like have this big global analysis of what's going on. But to me, I guess you need some type of tool for someone to have some idea of where to start from. But ultimately, they have a major downside, and that's twofold. One is almost all of these things don't involve speed and load with the testing. Things trade drastically with speed and load. And here's the crazy part. Elite athletes get better with speed and load. You'll test them on some shit where they look absolutely dysfunctional. And then you add speed and load and you're like, that's not the same guy. Okay. And so you can get into all crazy things. The other thing is when you have this set movement screen that you're going to, it doesn't force you to learn how to observe movement and see different things. Because it's just, hey, this is my movement screen. These are my 5 things I go to. That's what I do. Instead of saying, okay, buddy, we're going to spend hours and hours, month after month, watching people move and understanding what's happening. And understand, okay, what I'm seeing happening now is a result of what they did 2 or 3 steps before this, and figuring out how that's changing, and just learn the process of observing movement, looking at it from a macro perspective, then dialing into a micro to see what's going on and going back and forth and doing this over and over again. It's a skill. And it's a skill that it takes a lot of practice to be able to figure it out. You're going to get it wrong a bunch of times, and you're going to eventually get better and better at it. But if you go to the standard, this is my movement screen, you're never going to get good at observing stuff because it doesn't force you to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
For sure.
Do you notice any type of trend? Because like you mentioned, you've worked with Sidney McLaughlin, you've worked with NFL athletes. Is there a trend in the way that these athletes breathe? And I ask that because you see in some sports, you see it a lot in lifting where there are a lot of people who may get away with breathing shallow. But I feel like you can't get away with being a good athlete in whether it's a grappling sport where you need to be able to breathe well all the time, or on a field or on a track. You can't get away with bad breathing unless maybe you can. So is there a trend there, or have you run into super elite athletes who are always shallow breathing and you've had to help them with that?
Yes, I've run into that. But here's the thing that I'll tell you. There's some things that super elite athletes do that they just do. Okay. And a lot of that is breathing. The really good ones, they already inherently understand what breathing can do for them. And they do this naturally without you even having to tell them to do it. Okay. And so at the super elite level, most times you don't see that. They kind of they don't even understand what they're doing, but they're doing it. It's usually the guys that are not at the elite level that you've got to feed that information to and sort of teach them how to do it. And that's common with quite a few things, not just breathing. You see that a lot. And they're good because they inherently understand those things.
So what does like good breathing with these elite athletes, what does it look like? What is it? If so that people can like understand how they're breathing into their diaphragm, et cetera. Like, what do you see?
Well, the key thing is your breathing has to allow you to have like rhythm and balance type of the whole thing. And so so for instance, let's say running, for example, like hard sprinting or something like that. There are very specific periods of time where you want to be be breath held. And there's other periods of time where you have to breathe out slowly and relax and breathe back in. Mm-hmm. And at high levels, that will actually get modeled. So this is where we're holding our breath intentionally. This is where we're going to exhale. This is what we're going to do. And it corresponds to a relaxation period where it's almost like the nervous system is recharging a bit while you're doing that. And so if you try to run the whole thing with no pattern, no breathing setup, no model, and you just go, you're going to burn out really fast. But once you learn how to breathe at the right times, you can find that you can go hard, have a small break for your nervous system to relax, go hard again, and sort of recharge that battery, you know? And so you can use breathing to do that in that example. Mm-hmm. And so I think also the need for the amount of relaxation when other things are moving fast is really going to dictate some of how you're breathing, because you can't be in a very stiff breath held position and move other things around you very quickly. You have to be way more relaxed than that. So I mean, the trick with that type of stuff is being able to breathe at the right time. So it's no different than I hand you a jar of peanut butter and the lid is stuck on. You want to open it. You're going to hold your breath, get it right in, and turn it and do it, right? But then once that job is done, you're going to relax and get going, you're at it again, right? And so if the idea is to open 10 of those things in 30 seconds, you're not going to, the whole time, you're going to crack one, you're going to go through it. And like in sport, a lot of that is the same way. Or even like I'm running and I'm running like, I'm a safety and I've turned and I'm running on a ball and I'm going 20 yards to try and close space and get to there. And I'm running, I'm breathing, but at the same time, I'm about to smack you when I get to you. At that point in time, I better not be breathing. I better have my breath held and be stiff and ready to go. So there's all that aspect that happens in sport, and some of it is just autonomic. You kind of just get it and figure it out. But some athletes need to be taught that, like, hey, you need to relax here. Like, you're working too hard, you know? Yeah. And like, the other thing that breathing helps with is, let's say we're driving a car. We put our foot to the floor. We press the thing as fast, and now it's going as fast as it can. Once the pedal is on the floor, it's going as fast as it can. If I push with 6,000 pounds of pressure and try and push my foot through the floor, the car is not going any faster. But in real life, if you continue to push like that, you're just blowing off energy and you're going to actually slow the car down. So what breathing can help you with is when you get to that point where the foot's on the floor and it's there, like breathing and then relaxing can help you maintain the right amount of output to just keep the foot on the floor and not put it all the way through the gas, you know, like or if you're wrestling and you're holding someone, you're going like, you got to hold them for long enough to submit them, but you can't gas yourself out holding them either. And if you're like, you're going to gas up before they gas out, you know? So you got to be able to like breathe right, hold them and apply what you want to do at the same time, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
What are some practices that you have for yourself to stay fit and to stay healthy and to stay out of pain as we age?
So for me, it varies from the time of the year, because sometimes I'm on the road a lot when I'm home, but I try to move a lot. And that, like, I'm typically on average I'm 13,000 steps a day type of thing, just moving around. Nice. That's just sort of my average. There's, times of the year where I'm up at like 30 or 35, depending on what's happening. And we can come back to that in a different topic. And I lift. I move around a lot and I lift. I don't really run anymore. And some of my lifting I do is somewhat dynamic because I want to be able to like walk into the weight room and demonstrate a perfect, power snatch with teaching tape technique. So I have to be able to lift a certain way to do that, you know?
Yeah, even when you were showing us stuff in the gym, you still move really well. You were moving explosively, which gets your attention. You know, if it's me trying to explain how someone should move explosively and I'm moving super slow or funky, then that's not going to really get anybody's attention.
Yeah, that's partly true. So you got to keep up some of that stuff. So I try to do stuff to do that. But one of the things that I do is I try to find ways to make a load harder without increasing the load. Because for me, I don't need to do that anymore. And so, and it's just going to cause problems in terms of nervous system, burnout, injuries, all types of stuff. It doesn't matter.
I was just talking to Andrew yesterday about like, we just think all these weights are so low. Like we think 40 pounds is super light. And it kind of is, depending on what you're doing and how you're asking yourself to do it. But you could make 40 pounds very difficult. You could make it very challenging. And I just think it's just because I think we're used to kind of the main lifts, and those main lifts are exercises that you work on, you master, and you're able to put more and more of those 45-pound plates on there. And you would get so desensitized to hearing somebody say like, oh, I did this exercise with 100 pounds. You're like, that's not that much. But it's like 100-pound dumbbell. It's fucking heavy.
Yeah, hell yeah.
It's a lot of weight.
Yeah, for sure. And so I do things. There's something I do, and I sometimes use this in a rehab phase with guys too. And it's when it comes to sport performance, really you want to worry about pushing the load. But for me, that's not there. So I would do things what I call 20 the hard way. And I do this quite regularly, which is, for example, squat. So I'm going to do a squat. Like, there's no point in me putting a huge load on a squat, and especially if my back's already sore, you're beat up or whatever. But I can put a reasonable load on my back, maybe 90 kilos or something like that. And then I can say, okay, what I'm going to do, the first 5 reps, I'm going to do a 5-second eccentric and a 5-second concentric. Then the next 5, I'm going to do a 3-second eccentric, 5-second pause in the bottom, and then come up. Then the last 10 reps, I'm just going to do a 3-second eccentric and come up. Boom. Do that for 20 reps. You're done. You're tortured. But I only had 90 kilos on my back. You know what I mean? And so I find ways. I wouldn't use that and expect to get faster from doing that. But at the same time, just in terms of me and my general health, that's a great way for me to make a load that's light feel really heavy without having to tax myself.
Send a signal to your body to keep that muscle.
Yeah, keep the muscle and work in my conditioning and do all that stuff and not strain my musculoskeletal system to the extent. And I can do it faster. Like if I wanted to go and try and squat way bigger weights for triples or something, I have to spend 45 minutes warming up to be able to get there, you know what I mean? And
do you still do drills and stuff like that? Like, track drills and like running drills and like, even though you're not like running, do you still mess with that?
Yep. Not as often as I probably should, but I still do them because I need to be able to demonstrate them and stuff like that and do them pretty well. And those are also great. When I do them, I feel like, man, I can't believe I haven't done this in a while because you feel bouncy again. You're going, right. It gets you going. Yeah. So,
you mentioned the pendulum swinging with certain things, like it's swung in terms of functional fitness. And you mentioned that you use some stretching in terms of what you do with your athletes, right? There seems to have been a pendulum shift where now a lot of coaches are talking about how static stretching is horrible for athletes. You see this a lot on the functional side. You see this a lot for strength coaches. But there's context with how you use stretching, any type of stretching. So when it comes to static stretching, because there's a video on your page where you talked about you do stretch your athletes. How do you use it so it doesn't end up being a net negative for the athlete's ability to be explosive and strong and stiff?
So, first of all, unless you're doing tons of static stretching and doing it like right before a training session, I don't think static stretching is a problem. Okay, I think for a lot of people, doing static stretching after workouts and when they're sore can make a big difference in how they recover and how they feel. And
in a good way?
In a good way.
Okay.
And also, I like to do static stretching in conjunction with some type of body work. So it doesn't have to be real body work. It could be as simple as, I'm going to do static stretching for my quads, but I'm also going to foam roll them for a minute. So I'm going to foam roll them for a couple of minutes. I don't love a foam roller, but let's use that as an example. We're going to foam roll your quad for a couple of minutes. Then we're going to do a couch stretch. Then I'm going to foam roll again, do another cow stretch. So you're getting the benefit of getting those tissues compressed, maybe breaking down adhesions, putting some type of input into the tissue that makes your brain want to say, okay, I'm going to relax this thing and let you stretch it. And then you stretch it again. That's a great way. But when I was younger, I would have been in that whole idea of static stretching is terrible. Like, you don't need to do that. But as I got older and as I started to use it on more and more people, because I was like, what we're doing is not working. Let's try to do some more static stretching. I saw really good improvements with guys in doing it. Now, I'm not saying we're going to go and do 20 minutes of static stretching before we sprint. But as a standalone, it's great. And, at night, just at home doing extra static stretching, I find it works great for people to just lengthen their tissues, calm their resting muscle tone a little bit. I think it's great.
And when you're helping these athletes, I'd imagine that you're like manually stretching them a bit, right?
Yeah, I'm manually stretching them.
And can you feel the difference? Like, you work on them 1 week to the next. I don't know.
You can feel the difference
goal,
20 minutes later sometimes.
Wow.
It's when you stretch them well, And when we do, like, say, warm up for a speed session, it's almost all dynamic flexibility. But there can be a component of static flexibility incorporated into that, especially if there's a tightness or the athlete's feeling something. We'll stop and address that. And sometimes static dressing works well.
Yeah, we have a tendency to like box everything in so much. And even if you were doing a sprinting workout, if you wanted to static stretch a bunch right before it, you certainly could do that with the upper body. You could probably have no negative cost to it at all.
You probably wouldn't. And again, if you did some static stretching and then went back to doing some dynamic before you sprinted, you would be fine anyway.
Tell us more about tempering, because tempering can be pretty brutal. Tempering, my understanding, is you just taking something super heavy and just putting it on an area that's tight and you're just kind of rolling it out.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, I think the level of compression that you can get on tissues and how deep you can get into them is huge with tempering, and you can't really achieve it with other things. Again, if you have someone who's really skilled with their hands and they're going to work on you, that's going to be better than anything. But short of that, tempering works fantastic. And I believe that one of the reasons it works so well is not just a huge amount of compression that you're getting in there, but I think the nervous system message that happens when you're getting that level of compression on you, it's almost like, holy crap, I've got to adapt to this somehow. And you go through it, and then when it comes off, it's like, oh, we're okay. And then it sort of relaxes again and you go on it. And for me, it's crazy. When I get tempered, I have a love-hate relationship with doing it before a workout, because it gets me so loosened up and kind of ready to go. But if I have someone temper my quads for, say, 6-7 minutes, which sometimes I really need, I literally could take a nap. I feel like if someone could come and do that before I went to bed, it'd be great. Just roll and temper me up, because it changes my tissue quality that much. Like, I'm that relaxed, I feel like I want to go to sleep. Now, as I move around and get ready, I can go and get the workout done. But the change in that nervous system state for me is enormous. It's that big.
So you could probably use something like a kettlebell, but what are some tempering tools? Like, do you know some companies so people can kind of look some of the stuff up?
Well, so Donnie Thompson, he's the grandfather of all the tempering stuff. Yeah. And he's got Rogue making a tempering tool for him now. And there's several guys out that custom make stuff. And you get pieces of steel, 5-inch diameter steel, 24 inches long is going to give you 135 pounds. And then you can get smaller diameter ones to do what you need to do. There's also
we have he calls it the ex-wife.
The ex-wife.
We have the ex-wife in the gym. It's like 200 pounds.
That's right.
I'm gonna go fuck with the ex-wife a little bit. I haven't.
Oh, dude, you get someone to put that on your hamstrings. It's like it's crazy. Or you roll all the way to your calves and shit. Whew.
What I love on the hamstrings is static tempering. So literally, you take those the 135, the ex-wife. You take 4 of those and line them up from the top, like just the crack of your butt where your hamstring starts, all the way down to your knee, and just lay them there and just sit there for 5 minutes. It feels so good.
That sounds brutal. We do have something else in the gym too. I think that you can put weight on, right? We have one of those.
Okay, so,
Yeah, I think so.
Kabuki. Duffin. He makes one that's loadable.
Yeah.
And has the crease in the
That
middle.
might be
so it
the
works
one
on
we
the
have,
spine. Yeah. And then he also makes the sort of the pain pill and the boomstick, which can be used for tempering, but
Yeah,
they can
those
also
are
be used.
great. Yeah, the pain pill, it's a big old fat chunk of metal,
Yeah, I think that one's 44 pounds, and it's got a rounded edge. You can tip it up and do different things.
Just
with
use whatever you can, right? I mean, you could use a plate if you needed to. It's like a 45-pound plate or 25-pound plate, and use kind of the edge of it, and just whatever you can get your hands on to start.
Yeah, you can roll like crosswise across tissue with a plate and stuff like that. You can do what works great on like calves is you side lie. You get just a barbell. You put a plate on the end of it, and you have one end like jam into a corner in a landmine or something. So you're just rolling the thing along your calf.
Oh, wow.
It works fantastic.
Yeah, you know, the sleeve of the barbell a lot of times does work really well. I forgot about that. And just even taking a barbell. And if you're new to it and haven't ever tried it before, I think it's something that everyone should give a try to. What have you noticed in terms of like tightness with athletes? Have you noticed any sort of like real particular trends where it's just like, especially these athletes that are like explosive and powerful and fast, are they typically tight in the quads or tight in the lower back, or is it kind of just all over the place?
Well, the ones that are really explosive and fast, they're not really tight anywhere. You know what I mean? They have their own little idiosyncrasies that they have to watch out for to get tight. But for what you and I would consider tight, they're not tight anywhere. You know what I mean? But what you will see, though, is they're dynamically more flexible than they are statically, almost always. So it's
So
not
like something like touching the toes might be not great, but they're really flexible in motion.
Right. So like bending over and putting your hands on the ground might be difficult, but standing here kicking my foot this high in the air is not that difficult. You know what I mean? They have a better dynamic flexibility than a static flexibility. You see that. You also see that they'll develop certain issues where they get tight in one spot, usually from overwork, sometimes from compensation, whatever it may be. And you'll see that. Like somebody might have great mobility and great soft tissue throughout their entire legs except their calves. And that's just their weak spot. And you got to stay on it all the time. That's common in those elite people to do that. And I mean, I use the calf as an example, but it could be anything. You know, that's and then you have to know that, okay, that's their problem. Let's get after it. And sometimes you'll find that virtually every problem that comes up comes from that one thing that they can't stay loose. You know, now I'm having a problem with my hip. Well, it's still coming from your calf, because, you know, and go back and fix that. They have a lot of tells with that.
What have you, our Project family? It's time to step up your barefoot shoe game. Now, we talk about foot health all the time on the podcast, but the winter months are coming, and Vivo's come out with some slick boots. These are their Gobi boots, and they have different colors on their website. Now, these have a wide toe box, they are flat, and they are flexible, and they are stylish and sexy as boots. But obviously, Vivo is awesome because they not only have boots and casual shoes like their Novus right here, which again, wide, flat, flexible, so that your foot can do what it needs to do within the shoe, and you're getting the benefit of having your feet improve while you're walking around in shoes. But they also have shoes for the gym, like their Modus, again, flat, flexible, wide toe box, along with their Primus Light 3s and all the classics that you know. They also have shoes for running and trail running on their website. So again, for all barefoot type shoes, Vivo is your one-stop shop for pretty much all the types of kicks you need. Andrew, how can they get it?
Yes, that's over at vivobarefoot.com/power project, where for the entire month of December, but December only, you guys will receive 20% off your very own Vivo Barefoot shoes. Again, vivobarefoot.com/power project, links in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
Noticed, because barefoot stuff has become super popular, and a lot of people have noticed that their feet are weak. But what do you notice is like maybe the positives of it and potentially the negatives of it?
Okay. So the positives of it are huge in terms of strengthening the foot, okay? Getting good proprioception. I think we mentioned earlier about your body works like a computer, your brain is the keyboard, your feet are the keyboard, your brain is the CPU and the processor. So you want to get clean inputs in. The cleaner the input, the better the output, right? And so training barefoot helps you with that. It's great. So it has a ton of usefulness in that sense.
Yeah.
However, you can't use it for everything because there are other areas where you don't necessarily want to expose yourself to, say, impact. Like if you're gonna jump off of a 30-inch box and do, not a lot of people have the capability in their feet to be able to do that type of stuff, and it's probably not a good thing to do that. So for that, I wouldn't necessarily want to do something barefoot. I also see a lot of times people who do a lot of barefoot training, they don't have the ability to grip the ground in the same way. So you can't work your muscles the same way. Like I can't accelerate out of a dead stop on grass and get into the positions that I want to get into without having a certain amount of grip. I would fall, literally, okay? Or if I'm upright running and I'm coming through, when I cycle, I have to be able to like kind of grab the ground slightly to be able to like grip and go. And I can't do that on a barefoot. I mean, I can do it. I just can't do it like I can on a cleat or a spike, right? So if my sport demands that I have to do that, when I go back to doing that, I'm going to be potentially, I see it at risk for injury because now you're working that thing like crazy and just not necessarily doing it as well. So in that sense, that's not a good option for barefoot. But again, it's like anything else. It's a tool. And if you use barefoot work as a tool, it's great. And if you try to make a one thing fits all tool, you're probably not going to be as successful with it,
Yeah.
And I think that for everyday moving around activity, it's great to be barefoot with that. And then be selective about what barefoot things you do that are like highly active and sport specific. And that's a great way to do it.
Gotcha.
Let's take a break just for a couple minutes, and we'll come back because I think there's still a lot more to talk to him about. I need to use the bathroom, but maybe you need to as well. We'll just take 5. Let's talk about that sled dragon stuff first.
There's a sled dragon?
Sled dragon, yeah. You can kick it off, Nsima. You were asking him some questions about it.
Oh, shit. Well, we were talking earlier and you mentioned that sometimes you would do like 20-minute sled drags, which I don't
20
hear many
minutes
people
straight?
talk about.
20 minutes straight.
Yeah. So when it comes to like using that with athletes, I think I've seen when we talked, you do sled work with athletes a lot different than I hear most coaches do. Most coaches will use that as a warm up before a workout. But you take them through a lot of ways of using the sled.
Yeah, for sure. So to me, it's just good GPP. So we'll drag that thing with light loads constantly. Sometimes for heavier guys that we want to get some metabolic stress to get, without really stressing them out, just to get some work. It's great because there's no eccentric. It's pretty easy. You can load it up pretty well. We'll just walk them. Doing forward walks, backwards walks, crossover walks, just continuous moving without stopping. 10 minutes, 20 minutes at a time. I personally, when I do them, I like to stick to one style of walking for a long period of time because I also get a localized like fatiguing effect, which I like. But if you just want to get like good blood flow, work on some movement, get a cardiorespiratory response type of thing, then you can just change the movements and just keep on walking. And it's very little impact on your recovery. And sometimes it really will help your recovery, loosen you up a lot. We typically do them at the end of sessions, though not at the beginning of the sessions.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
About how much weight you got on there?
It's typically about 3 plates on the sled, 2 or 3, depending on. Sometimes some of the heavier guys will go 4 plates on there. Yeah.
And you've seen it help lean some of these people out too?
A ton, yeah.
And then what about like maybe, sounds like it's like restorative in some way, like it helps kind of restore tissue a bit and stuff like that?
For sure. Like it'll make you feel a whole lot less sore, get blood flow going to everywhere, especially when you're using all different types of motions with it. I find it to be really effective for that. Yeah.
I know you've been big on the post-workout shakes and stuff like that, and even intra-workout shakes, and you have your own supplement brand, your Optimum EFX, and you got your essential aminos and ketones and all these different kinds of things. And I went to your gym. You were like handing that right to the athlete, sometimes when they got done with a workout and sometimes even during the workout. What are you trying to accomplish with that? What do you think that's doing? What have you recognized or noticed that stands out about that practice?
Well, for me, the key window is more the intra-workout window than the post-workout window. And so just when you start to work out, you're going to have a whole ton of blood flow that gets increased, obviously. And so I see that as an opportunity to deliver nutrients to the muscle in a way.
Move this way just a bit, sorry.
Yeah, so I see that as an opportunity to deliver nutrients to the muscle in a way that's, you can't always do that because you're not going to have that level of blood flow when you're not exercising. So if you're sending the blood there anyway, you may as well send it full of all types of nutrients that can help you with that workout and also help you with recovery and stimulating, protein synthesis, And so using a well-curated blend of essential amino acids does that really well. And obviously, I use a leucine-rich version of those essentials so that we get that signaling, that mTOR signaling. But you also have all the mechanical stretching and breaking down of the tissues, which is also a stimulus for protein synthesis. So you get that going at the same time as you're fueling these aminos that are sending the signal. It helps you to process that stuff, incorporate it, and get the best use of the time of that workout. So I find that recovery is through the roof. Like, it's a big difference. If you use enough of it, it's almost hard to get sore after a while, And so it makes a big difference. I also add, citrulline malate, betaine anhydrase, carnitine, all types of other amino acids are in that mixture as well. And we'll go as high as 30 grams of EAAs in that window, depending on how big the person is on a leg day. It might get that high. But it's really, nobody kind of works out without it. So
you were telling me that it helps with the accumulation of fatigue a little bit.
100% it does, yeah. So, I mean, it helps that in multiple ways. I think that some of the other ingredients outside of the EAAs that are in there are probably more responsible for that. But even the idea of, if you're doing like long extended stuff, even people that are running, say, like your mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell that's doing all this energy production work for you, they're made of protein. They need amino acids to be replenished and repaired and do all those types of things. So that aspect as well leads to an endurance effect. But the combination of all these things. It's a really palpable difference on endurance. And obviously you get it can help with a pump as well because of some of the ingredients in there. But it's not specifically a pump product in any way, shape, or form. But there's enough citrulline in there that it can help you with that type of stuff.
You said this is the Optimum EFX EAAs?
No, this is the amino matrix that we're talking about, yeah.
When it comes to supplements, like over-the-counter supplements, what are some ones that you are a fan of?
I don't use a ton of stuff outside of what I have. And what I do is I have a lot of raw materials where I can curate kind of whatever I need based on what the athlete wants. And so we do that a lot. So we'll make things like, if you need, some magnesium, I'll grab magnesium glycinate, weigh it out, combine it with, if I need to combine that with, if I'm making an electrolyte mix, I might combine it with other electrolytes. If I'm using that I might combine it with some glycine for a relaxation effect. I just do different things. I kind of custom blend all that stuff all the time. And
you have a sleep formula. I really like that one a lot.
Yeah. The Neuroff, yeah. It's got glycine and inositol, ashwagandha, magnesium in pretty big doses. Then it has a couple of nervines, so valerian, passion flower. And it's great because it doesn't just help you. It can help you sleep, but it's not going to necessarily make you sleepy. It kind of relaxes you. It calms your racing mind, takes away that sort of anxious edge that you might have, and just puts you in a relaxed state. So if you want to go to sleep, it helps a lot. But it's not a product that will necessarily knock you out. So I really like that. And when you wake up, you don't wake up drowsy. It works really, really well. It's actually the product that is the least sexy of anything that I make, but it's the one that once people try it, they buy it again and again. It's the one that once they try it, they use it all the time. It's hard to get them into it, but once they do it, they're like, man, this stuff is great.
How about Neuron? Because I'm a huge fan of nootropics and stuff, and I've seen it has a good amount of some good stuff in there. So please tell me about that.
So Neuron is that is by far my most popular product. I can't keep that thing in stock, and so many guys, so many professional athletes use that, and they're like, when they don't have that, it's like a problem. So what it's really designed to do is increase focus, alertness, and neural drive. Okay, so one of the problems with many neural drive products is they rely way too heavily on caffeine. So they're super high dose caffeine stuff. And that's only going to get you so far. And then they don't have enough variety of products that work by multiple mechanisms of action on your brain and nervous system to get you going. So they're too one-sided or individualistic in their approach. So my approach is I make it with caffeine and without caffeine. But I use a wide variety of ingredients, some that work by increasing production of acetylcholine, some that work by inhibiting acetylcholine esterase, some that work by elevating dopamine, and so some that provide substrates for fuel. So it's a multimodal approach, and it's not a 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 + 1 = like 10. And so your level of like arousal and alertness and focus and neural drive is high, but you don't have that jittery, anxious, overstimulated caffeine. Even the one with caffeine, it's only 150 milligrams of caffeine. Then the caffeine-free one obviously has 0. And,
there's a caffeine-free one.
Yeah, there's a caffeine-free one. And a lot of people, like, it's really interesting because what I find is if you divide people into 2 different categories, decision makers and non-decision makers, generally speaking, the decision makers do better without the caffeine. Okay.
Say that again.
The decision makers with this type of a nootropic product do better without the caffeine. And then the people who aren't just have to run through walls, they'll do better with the caffeine. Okay. But I mean that's a broad distinction, and it's not necessarily always true. But generally speaking, I definitely find that to be the case.
Just thinking, my wife makes all the decisions, and caffeine has like 0 impact on her.
Well, there you go. So that is definitely. I use that product a lot for just focus, studying, reading, not even really for working out. And I love it for that. I have like some of my athletes now that were on it, they're retired and they're now like broadcasters. They don't do a broadcast without it. They're scooping it going because they feel like they're so focused and dialed in and stuff like that. So it's really good. Many of the ingredients in it also aid fat loss because they help you mobilize fatty acids. So that's a nice added benefit for it as well. And it tastes not very good because many of the ingredients, well, first of all, we're not using anything like sucralose to sweeten it. And then a lot of
all the stuff you have has a different taste to it.
Yeah.
People should know that. But it's because you're not using artificial sweeteners and a bunch of other stuff that you don't believe in.
Right. And because the dosages are big. So it's like, you go out and you get a product that has tyrosine in it. It's got like 500 milligrams of tyrosine in it, which is okay. But then once you go to 2,500 milligrams of tyrosine, and then you go to 2,500 milligrams of acetyl L-carnitine, and then you go to like 1,200 milligrams of alpha GPC. After a while, you can only mask that stuff so much when the dosages are like 4 or 5 times the dosages were what in your competitors. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so that's part of the reason it works well, but it's also part of the reason that makes it difficult to flavor when you have that much stuff.
Who cares about flavor when you're trying to perform better?
Right. That's what I say.
I got the neuron in the cart. I got the matrix in the cart.
There you go.
Definitely gonna get that neuron.
I tell people the flavor of neuron is called greatness.
That's what that is.
I always wondered what greatness tastes like.
There you go.
Tell these grapplers over here. Tell them what would be best for them to take maybe during a workout, during their jiu-jitsu sessions.
Yeah. Well, I think taking the neuron before the workout would be great.
Okay.
And then taking the amino matrix during the workout would be fantastic. That's probably the best combination of the 2 products that would work well for you.
Maybe throw a little salt in there or some sort of hydration of some sort?
So there's salt added to both of those products.
Oh, okay.
But
Smart.
extra salt doesn't hurt for sure.
Yeah. That's why I said I got this. I'm getting the stimulant-free neuron because like sometimes I grapple in the evening. Sometimes I work out in the evening. I'm not trying to have caffeine in me at like 6 p.m.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get
That's excellent. And there's not very many good nootropic that you can use for pre-workout that work well that still allow you to sleep after.
Yeah.
But what works great is if you do that in the evening, just take the near off after that too.
Near off?
Yeah, so near off is the opposite.
Switch on and
is
off.
the opposite of neuron. That's how I kind of designed that to be the yin and the yang for the nervous system, trying to get you up and then bring you back down. And so, that idea came to me years ago. I was working with some track athletes and just consulting with a few of them, and they were some of them had some really good success, but they they weren't like super at the top. They were world class, but they weren't good enough to be fighting for medals. So you'd run rounds at world championships or something, and then you'd run a PB, you'd make it to the semifinal, and you're on cloud 9, but you got to come back the next day. And it's like, you just did something your body's never done before. You're emotionally hyped because it's the best thing going, but it's not over. You got to come back the next day. What I started to realize is, until you get back down to level, like till those catecholamines are back under control and you're at a baseline level of excitement, the recovery process doesn't even really start. So the faster you can get back down to like that ground zero of excitement, the faster you're going to recover. So I wanted Neuroff to do that. And then it had a unexpected, it should have been expected, but it was kind of an unexpected result in sleep quality. So boom, we started using it for that too. And so quite often we'll have people take it after the workout and then again before they go to bed, if the workout is a super CNS intense workout.
Is the Neuroff what you were mentioning is the sleep formula, or is the sleep formula something different?
No, it's that he was calling the Neuroff the sleep formula. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So that was, so it's pretty cool. It really works well as that up and down, that yin and yang type of thing. And
Nice.
I feel that if you don't address both ends of it, you're missing something. You always, anything that goes up, it's got to come down. We got to go and, sometimes I use the analogy of like, we're not a NASCAR. We're Formula One. Okay, we got to go from 0 to 60 and then back to 0 and do it again over and over. And so that's where the two component piece comes in, to be able to get up and get back down so you can go again.
Yeah.
I find it super interesting that things like dopamine and serotonin and all these different things going on in our brain can impact our levels of strength and can impact the central nervous system. I remember when I was going for a 500-pound bench a while back at 220, you helped me come back and be able to get that bench probably just maybe 6 or 8 weeks later. And you were describing, hey, if you take these supplements, before every workout, it's going to give you like this is a tiny amount, but some of these things, even stuff that's over the counter, can really fuel somebody and actually make a difference, right?
Yeah, for sure. And for some people, they can make a pretty significant difference if they have deficiencies in those things. But we're talking small differences. We don't realize, a 1 or 2% increase in certain sports is the difference between like victory and not even making the final. You know what I mean? So like if you could get 1 or 2% out of it, that's fantastic. But on everyday stuff, the focus, the concentration, the ability to recall, that type of stuff it's noticeable. And the thing that I really like about Neuron, it's instantly perceivable. It's not like, I'm not mocking fish oils. I like fish oils, but it's not like you take it, you don't feel anything, it's just kind of going on. It's like you take Neuron and 20 minutes later, some shit is happening. Like you can feel it,
Yeah.
And so I like that aspect of it too.
That's sick. So how much like alpha GPC does somebody need to take in order for it to actually be effective? Because I'm pretty sure like Alpha Brain and that supplement made alpha GPC really popular to where now drinks and every supplement is like, oh, this is a cognitive enhancer. We have alpha GPC. But then you look at the label and it's like, sure, they sprinkled a little bit on top before they closed the lid to say that they can have it in there, but it's probably not going to do anything.
Pixie dusting, right?
Right.
So to answer your question in short, 600 milligrams.
Okay.
That's what's in this right here, 600 milligrams.
Oh, nice.
All right. There you go.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, there's 600 milligrams alpha GPC.
Really?
In the Mind Bullet tea.
I did not know that.
That's why that one hits different.
Yeah. The alpha GPC is a great product.
But going up to around 1,200 milligrams probably hit most people, right? Pretty
100%.
good. Yeah.
You would never need to go more than 1,200.
And then, so earlier you said that something along the lines of an acetylcholine inhibitor. Why would you want to, or if maybe I heard that wrong, but like, why would you want that?
Okay, so you're building acetylcholine, which you want, but acetylcholine esterase is the enzyme that breaks it down. So acetylcholine esterase inhibitor inhibits the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine so you can keep acetylcholine higher for longer.
Okay.
So there's two ends of it. You're increasing acetylcholine by providing substrates to make more acetylcholine, and you're inhibiting the breakdown of acetylcholine by inhibiting the enzyme that breaks it down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and then vitamin B5 is very heavily involved in that process too. So there's some B5 in there as well.
So in doing that, then something like as simple as just eating eggs would be more effective once you inhibit those, right?
I mean, yes, the levels of acetylcholine or choline that we're deriving when we're taking, 600 or 1,200 milligrams of GPC is a whole different level than getting choline from eggs.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, just making sure. Yeah. Oh man, that's exciting. I can't wait to try it.
How'd you start to learn all this shit? Because this is way different than some of the stuff you learned in track when you were younger.
Yeah, for sure. So I took a real early interest when I was super young in just health stuff in general. When I was actually in high school, there was a guy that introduced me to the old school Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw life extension type stuff and all the stuff that they were doing. And so I started getting into that stuff, and it was pretty cool, and I started reading about it. And then, when I went to school, obviously studying, biology, biochemistry, that was sort of where I was at. So my brain was already thinking that, and everything was like, how can I go and where can I go? And then what really sparked my interest in trying to get more, backing up to, I also got introduced to nootropics around 1990 in the form of piracetam or piracetam, Nutripil. And that really sparked my interest in seeing stuff. I was kind of an early adopter of all that stuff, It was Nutripil, Hydrogen, those types of things, and just seeing what they were doing. So I got interested in that early. And then I started getting a huge interest in how can we get the nervous system to play a role of arousal that's so profound and so automatic that it's changing. And I thought about it from this perspective, like, think about somebody comes around and they sneak up on you and they scare the shit out of you. You're like, whoa! Okay. Think about how you react to that. The speed of that reaction and the force of that reaction. Okay. Our nervous system's capable of doing some crazy stuff. Now, what if there's some way that we can create a chemical mixture to duplicate that reaction for an athlete in the starting block? Okay. That is like something that's incredible to be able to do. I don't know that we can do that. But the whole idea with all this sort of nootropic stuff enhancing the functioning of the central nervous system that's the holy grail. That's what you want to get to. Mm-hmm. So I started playing with different things with that stuff early on. And then I started also playing around with amino acids early on with, there was an Australian company that we used to get stuff from. And back then it was like, these things were expensive. We couldn't get them in decent amounts, and they all tasted awful. Didn't really know what the hell I was doing, but we knew enough to be dangerous and started fooling around with different things. Yeah. And then as I, got more education and learned more stuff, I started to recognize stuff. And when I saw there were some supplements that were coming out with different things, but they were missing things. Like, some people came out with some EAA type things, but they were calling them EAAs, but they didn't have tryptophan in them, so they weren't real actual full spectrum EAAs, or things were underdosed, or I just realized that people they were running a business, and in order to do that business, they had to create a product that had enough margin to get to the general population that had some stuff in it, but they weren't trying to make a product like that a super athlete was going to take, and it probably was a bad business strategy to try and do that anyway. And so I had to kind of figure out how am I going to source things, get some raw materials, put some stuff together, and start experimenting and do that. I didn't really expect it to become a business per se. I just wanted to be able to get the ingredients that my athletes needed and play around and turn basically the facility into a lab in terms of, it's great because I've got all these guys. I'm controlling their training. I'm controlling their recovery. The ones who listen, I'm controlling their diets. So I got all these. When I start manipulating things, I can really see what I think is working and not working and getting feedback. It's not obviously double-blind, placebo-controlled, gold standard type study, but it's getting me good, valuable information that's better than that in some ways. And so I was able to just play with that stuff and keep going. I've got a keen interest in it.
No, that's super effective because you're seeing what works on like athletes. You know what I mean? And then these people have to go out and perform in games. They have to perform in like really perform in training, not just like go in and have fun in the gym. So that's pretty awesome. Like for me personally, like I use protein, I use creatine. There's some supplements that I use based off of my blood work, but I don't really use anything like what you're talking about right now. So I got some. I just got some of the Neuron SF, the essential aminos, and the Near Off. I'm very interested to see kind of how my body feels with that stuff because I can feel stuff pretty easily. Yeah, you know. So this is gonna be. I'm pumped.
I'm anxious to get your feedback on that. I think you're really gonna like the Neuron, especially.
Sick.
What are your thoughts on? Are you still using ketones?
Yep, we use ketones from time to time.
And what do those
for
do?
Different reasons? Well,
in your case, like when you're using it with athletes,
one thing they don't do is fat loss. A lot of people believe that ketones are a fat loss product, but that's not really what they are. The biggest effect I find they have is on cognitive function, like focus, alertness, that type of stuff. It works quite well on that. And then obviously they're an energy source, but they're a better energy source for longer endurance type activity than they are for like the explosive type activity. But I mean, explosive stuff repeated over and over, there's some stuff for that as well. But I think what they're really good at is the downstream signaling effects that they have in terms of whether that's mitigating oxidative stress, endothelial function, brain function, all those types of things, the signaling that the effects they have from that, they can be used for that.
Almost signaling fasting in a way, right?
Yeah, for 100%. Okay. The same types of things that would happen with fasting. So I think those are really great. I don't utilize them a lot, but we do use them in certain cases. I think there are some people who use ketones for therapeutic purposes, and that's a whole different world and a whole different thing. There's super cool things that you can do them for that purposes. From my perspective, they're nothing more than an energy source and a potential signal molecule. And I feel that they have their use, but you gotta. They're not a magic bullet like some people try to sell you. You know, you take ketones and it's pretty much the same as, you know, you're gonna drop fat. It's the same as going low carb, and you're gonna get all the same effects in that. And that's just really not the case.
What are your thoughts on a carnivore diet?
Love it. I think that a carnivore diet is fantastic for gut health and cleaning up your gut. It's great for obviously getting huge amounts of protein, which is king and very important to do. And it's also really good at satiating you. Like it's, you know, I love carnivore. The hard thing for me about carnivore is eating enough of it. Because like, I just have a harder time eating that much meat. And I love meat. I enjoy meat. It's just that, like, if I'm on the go and I'm running, I can get 50 grams of cottage cheese in my face in about 3 minutes. You know what I mean? It's just that simple.
Yeah.
If I'm going to sit down and try to eat 10 ounces of steak, it gets old after a while for me, even though I enjoy it. But I do think it's a great diet. I'm not one of those people that's like, because you're carnivore, then you have to be anti-vegetable or anti-fruit or anti-anything. I think you can blend it well. You can have a semi-carnivore diet and have some fruit in there. And if you like some vegetables, have some of those in there too. What I've seen with me and with a lot of other people is they don't do as well with the vegetables as they do with the fruits mixed with the meat. And for a lot of people, cleaning up their guts requires removing a lot of those vegetable type things to get their gut cleaned up. And I can't put my finger on exactly why that is. There's a lot of people who have theories about that, some of which are very sensationalized in my opinion. But whatever it is, I feel that it works well. So like, I mean, obviously this is graphic, but if I'm on carnivore, it's like, I know that my gut's going well, and this is very anecdotal, so people that are like evidence-based don't want to hear this stuff. But I'm on carnivore, and I take a shit. It's a perfect dark tan log that results in a ghost wipe every time. That's it. It's fucking like what else do I need to know about how my gut is working when that's how I shit all the time? You know what I mean? Like, and then as soon as you start adding other stuff, it doesn't work like that. So I'm like, for me and for other people that I've used it for, it works fantastic for that. You know what I mean? And even things like if you try to do carnivore and you're on the road, that's trickier. And then you get shitty meat, and it's not even the shitty meat, but they cook it in bad oils and all that type of stuff. And then right away you can tell it's not doing really good stuff for your gut and things of that nature. And when I say bad meat, I don't necessarily mean that it has to be organic or 100% grass-fed all the time, but there's a big difference between even non-grass-fed, decent cutting meat that you buy in the grocery store and grill up versus the Philly cheesesteak shit that you get in the mall when you throw away the bun and just eat the Philly cheese. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so with that, I don't think it would be a real good idea to use those types of meats for carnivore, but it works well.
What about lowish carbs for some of your athletes? Is that something you prescribe? I know Poliquin seemed like he was pretty into that.
I love using low carbs in athletes. I'm of the view that you need to earn your carbs all the time. And so depending what the demand is and what your situation is, that's what dictates how many carbs that you need. Mm-hmm. So, there's certain times a year where like I'm doing 30,000 steps a day, and half of those steps are kind of like jogging around or dragging equipment or demonstrating stuff and doing all those types of stuff. And like when I'm doing that and squeezing a workout in, I can eat whatever carbs I want and I'll just get leaner. It doesn't matter. Just because my activity level is that high, I'm earning all of my carbs. Mm. There's other times where you're closer to sedentary. And if you eat carbs then, you're going to be messed up. And I just think if you take the approach that you always earn your carbs, you're going to be great. And that might mean you have to be low carb depending on what your activity is, but that's what you have to do. And I feel that there's a lot of noise in terms of calories in, calories out, the whole that equation versus the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity type thing. And there's a big battle, and there's this whole like diametrically opposed people that want to fight about the whole thing. And I'm just like, you guys can both be right about this whole thing. You know what I mean? Because the calories in, calories out, from just a plain physics, when you look at it and you understand it, it makes sense. It's hard to say that that's wrong. Okay? However, my problem with just simply stating that is twofold. One is most people are terrible at understanding how to count calories, how to track them, don't want to track them, and understanding what your basal metabolic rate is and how your activity affects that to try and make this magic calculation to track your calories. Most people have no idea how to do that. Even well-trained people sometimes don't know how to do that well. So that makes that harder to do, and most people just don't want to do that shit anyway. And the other thing about it is, and this is, I guess, what my biggest problem with it, it doesn't give people what I feel are actionable steps that they can use to help them with their health immediately. So let me look at it like this. Let's just say that we get a meeting with Warren Buffett, and we get to sit down and ask him about all his stuff. So, boom, we got the man in front of us. We say, like, tell us, how do you get all this money? And he says to us, well, it's simple. I just spend less than I make. You'd be like, thank you very much. What am I going to do with that fucking information? Right? That's the same calories in, calories out to me. Like, now I understand that I get, well, what am I going to do with this information? Right? And so most of the people in that crowd don't provide other information because they're so harped on being right, which they kind of are, that they're not presenting other methods. Whereas some of these other models, even though they may want to ignore part of the calorie thing, at least their recommendations to follow that lead to some actionable things that people can do. And in the end, even if those actionable things are really just resulting in them lowering the calories, at the end of the day, it's an easier action plan to follow for a lot of things. Yeah. And, like, here's an example. Have you ever heard anybody say, dude, I'm so stressed out right now, bro, I just need to eat a steak and some broccoli? People don't do that shit. People go, I need a donut or whatever it is, right? So that they're going to overeat those types of foods easier. So by somewhat restricting those or making attention on those, you're kind of winning the battle in that sense to begin with. Mm-hmm. So I find that approach is a little bit more helpful. And then I think the calories in, calories out people like to discount the role of hormones in this whole process and the role of what your body do with the thing, which I think I understand their perspective in terms of look at this is we're still looking at the overall equation of this whole thing, and you can't dispute that. But at the same time, like you intuitively know that the hormones play a huge factor. It gets back to that whole, okay, I know grass is green. So if you want to tell me different, I don't want to hear it. If you want to tell me why, we'll talk about that. But as an example, if you go on a diet and you go on a diet, yours is exactly the same as his in terms of you're in a 500 calorie surplus, proteins stabilized and accounted for between the two of you, all this stuff is done. You're both on identical diets. Then I'm going to put you both on identical training. We're all going to do all that stuff, okay? However, I give you 600 milligrams of test a week and you don't. Okay.
That sounds like just right now.
Like real life.
Okay. So in 10 weeks, who's going to fare better? Okay. So, I mean, all other things being equal, right? So you know intuitively hormones matter. People know these things, right? But like to what extent and what happened, but you can't just discount that altogether and poo-poo the whole other side of the argument when you already know good well that they matter, right? And so to me, it's like, it's pointless getting into the argument of that whole thing because both sides are kind of right, really right. And it's just a matter of, I hate to see the overall message that can improve a lot of people's health being diluted or not getting out there because the two sides want to argue more about who's right as opposed to like, let's just get some good information out to people so that they can make good dietary choices to get to where they want to go. And I think that little battle confuses that a lot, and it's kind of sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you find it helpful to share with people that they can eat, natural foods? Like if you stick with natural foods, it's like kind of hard to go wrong as long as we're not like blending them and doing a bunch of shit to them and, making them overly processed.
100%. I tell people all the time, protein is king. That's the first thing. Get a whole lot of protein in and make it the first thing that you eat and make it a priority every time you eat. The next thing is don't eat sugar. Don't eat processed stuff. Okay? Obviously, you're going to fall off sometimes. It's going to be what it is. But that's generally what you want to do.
Some people, when you said don't eat sugar, they're like thinking, oh, I shouldn't eat fruits either. What do you mean when you say sugar?
I'm talking sugar, processed sugar.
Gotcha.
Don't eat that sugar. Okay? And then the other thing is never let your diet and your training go at the same time. If you're going to have a sloppy diet, keep your training high and don't mess that up. And if your training is going to go, make sure your diet's tight. Because you can survive for fairly decent periods of time messing up one or the other. The minute you start messing up both of them at the same time, you go downhill really fast.
Yeah.
And so if you follow those three simple rules, and I guess the fourth rule would be earn all your calories. Earn all your carbohydrates. So again, you got a big activity day, you want to eat more carbs. That's the day to do it. You're going to travel, 4 hours and work sitting on your butt one day. That's not the day to eat your extra carbohydrates, But if you just follow those rules, life gets a whole lot simpler. You know what I mean? And you can make really good gains. If you want to step on stage type ready, those 4 rules aren't enough for you. Mm-hmm. But for the vast majority of the population, including elite athletes, that works.
Do you think protein's an energy source?
It can be, absolutely be an energy source if you need it to be. And I think...
Through what, the amino acids or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. Through gluconeogenesis, you break down the proteins and make glucose. It's not ideally necessarily what you want to do, but in the end, eating a high amount of protein where the amount of calories that you need to sustain, where you'd need to get some gluconeogenesis from protein, is a better option because that end fate is still a productive fate. Overeating the fat or overeating the carbohydrate, its end fate is not a productive state. And so I would say there is not really a danger in overshooting on the protein side like there is a danger in overshooting on the fat and the carbohydrate side. So that's another reason why I say that protein is king. And you need all of those essential amino acids to be able to run virtually every function in your body. So having that helps. And then there's also the cost, the thermic effect of food or a specific dynamic action. The cost of metabolically processing that protein is so much higher that it helps your metabolism. And so for all those reasons, that's why protein is king.
How about nutrient timing? Do you have your athletes eat a certain time close to training? Are some athletes affected negatively if they eat close to training? How do you handle that?
It depends on the workout and it depends on the person. So I always like to have some type of liquid intra-workout fuel for the workout. But some athletes will eat a steak and be fine, 45 minutes later to go run. Other athletes, no, they need 2.5 hours sometimes before they do it. Also, if you're just going to kind of go lift some weights in the gym, that's a lot different than if you got to go to the track and run 6 times 300 at high pace on short rest and stuff like that. But so you really have to dial it in for the athlete. But in an ideal world, you want to go into the workout relatively fueled already, and then have some intra workout, and then fuel again after it. That's sort of peri-workout window. So before, during, and after, if you can get a lot of your nutrients in there, it's a great time to do it. And for me, I love getting stuff in there because that's when I have control. When they leave, I don't know I can make recommendations. I can give you a chef, but I can't stand there and put the stuff in your mouth, right? But when you're there, then I can. So that's those 3 periods of feeding where I literally can have control of what's going on. So I take advantage of it with whatever type of nutrients I can get in there. And I think also for people, in terms of consistency and compliance, if you can stick the majority of what you need for the whole day in that window and you just consistently do that window, it negates the need to, I forgot to take my this here and I forgot to take that there. And if you can get most of those nutrients in, then it simplifies your life a lot.
Yeah. What does that intra-workout shake look like, or that intra-workout drink that these athletes are drinking? Maybe it depends on the workout.
It depends on the workout. It depends on the athlete too. And so it's going to have usually some simple carbs, and then it's going to have a lot of amino acids, not just essentials, but all kinds of amino acids. And it's going to have some electrolytes, salt, all types of different things like that.
Gotcha.
And the amounts will vary for the athlete.
Okay.
You said try to minimize processed foods, but what about protein shakes?
Well, to a certain extent, that is a processed food, yeah. And so I don't think that has the same level of deleterious effect as other processed foods do, for sure. And you're also still in that category of protein is king there, but there are definitely some protein shakes that are better than others, for sure. I find that people have and this is super controversial, but people have a bigger problem with the crap they add to those protein shakes more than the protein itself. So I get a lot of people that come to me and they're like, I can't have whey. My so-and-so said I had a sensitivity and I can't have this, and whey bloats me, it does this. Okay, great, fair enough. But then, try this whey. And then it's a whey that's pretty much just whey. It doesn't have gums. It doesn't have artificial flavors or artificial sweeteners. It doesn't have soy or thickeners. It has none of that. It's really just and all of a sudden, the whey doesn't bother them anymore. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Was it the whey, or is it the fact that you've never actually had whey that doesn't have bullshit in it?
Or the fucking oat milk that they use.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So I think that, and that sort of, in some ways, brings us to the whole artificial sweetener conversation in some sense. And I think that's another thing where people are polarized, where it's like, yeah, they're fine, do whatever you want, or they're absolutely terrible, you're going to drop dead of cancer tomorrow. And I'm not in any of those camps. I feel that I used to use artificial sweeteners at one point in time in many of my products. And I feel that for a lot of people, if the choice is drink a Coke or drink a Diet Coke, drink the frickin' Diet Coke. You're always going to be better off not having that sugar. You know what I mean? But it's not a binary thing. It doesn't have to be that. It's I think that always having stuff that's super sweetened creates that palate, that sort of sweet palate, and it makes you want to have more sweet things all the time. Now, there's studies that will disagree with that, but I'm just telling you from what I see and what people experiment, that definitely happens. And I think that, again, I'm not really dealing with a population where they have to have it taste like candy to drink it. Like a lot of them guys are like, whatever, like shut up, you got it, and drink it. You know what I mean? So it's not as big a deal. I haven't had to use it. Yeah. And so I feel like there's not enough literature to say point blank, artificial sweeteners are terrible for you. However, it's trending in that direction. Okay, I believe in 4 or 5 years' time, there will be more stuff that said it's bad for your, and particularly bad for your gut. Part of the problem with analyzing whether or not these things are bad for your gut is we don't know what's bad for your gut. We talk about the gut biome like there's this full depth understanding of the gut biome. The truth of the matter is nobody knows shit about the gut biome. And the body of knowledge in that field is doubling about every 6 months. So even what you think you know now, you probably is not going to be necessarily a fact in a year. And you've got situations where they've studied like nomadic tribes and looked at their gut biome and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And they're looking for certain strains that we think are super important. And they're absent. They don't even have them. You know what I mean? And so like, again, it's really hard to say, to quantify whether or not something is having a negative effect on this gut biome when we don't even know enough about the gut biome, which is part of the problem with sorting out what's happening with your gut and some of these artificial sweeteners. So I'm leaning a lot on anecdotally what I see. And of course, you know, the scientific community probably doesn't really like that, and whatever it is, what it is. And but I see that people have better responses to these products when they don't, especially people who are sensitive to them when they don't have the artificial sweeteners in them. Mm. But having said that, again, if I'm just a regular everyday person and my choice is eat 70 grams of sugar that's going to spike the shit out of my, or have some aspartame, I'm just have the aspartame.
Yeah.
You know?
What do you love about your job?
Well, I think the thing that I love the most about my job is I've got the freedom to be creative and try to manipulate things and systems to create a change in an athlete that I can like see happen like right before my eyes, and that they can see it and we can all feel it and participate in it. And just the idea of people being able to take control over that part and make that change, I think is what I love the most about it. I like a lot of things about it, but that's probably the
these guys must drive you nuts every once in a while.
Oh, they do.
They must defy, like, you're like, come, like you haven't trained in 6, and they come in and they just do amazing. They're not eating the way they're supposed to.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that piss me off, but here's the really cool thing that happened to me early on with my job. It was a awesome life lesson, because you're dealing with guys who are making $11 or $12 million a year. Sometimes guys that have had making $20-some million a year. But they're doing that. They're playing a game that they love and getting that much money, and they still find shit to complain about with their jobs. So, and it's not shit that's unmerited complaining about. It's just the fact is, it doesn't matter what you do. There's going to be some shitty stuff that you don't like to do that you have to do. Mm-hmm. And the sooner you just embrace that fact and get on with it, the better life is going to be. So to me, it was like a fantastic life lesson.
Where can people find you?
That was amazing.
Where can people find you? Where can they buy some of the supplements and stuff?
OptimumEFX.com. You can find supplements. And I'm like Real PPAZ on Instagram, and pp-az.com, and training-wise, place to find me.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Appreciate it.
Always fun. Thanks for having me, guys.
Strength is never a weakness. Weakness is never strength. Catch you guys later. Bye.
Bye. We learned so much from Ian Danney, guys. So much. Which means you're probably going to also enjoy this episode with Ben Patrick, another great coach with a lot of great concepts to help you get out of pain, get stronger, move better. Check it out.